The coordinator's voice cut through the cold like a blade. Mrs. Hartwell. Margaret Poole didn't look up from her ledger when she said it. She just kept writing, her pen scratching across the paper like she was crossing out a debt. I think we need to have an honest conversation about your situation. Evelyn stood at the edge of the platform, 9 children arranged behind her like steps on a staircase. The oldest nearly as tall as she was, the youngest pressed against her hip, fingers twisted into the wool of her coat. The snow had been falling since morning. Fine, dry snow that found every gap in your clothing and settled there. My situation, Evelyn repeated. You've been passed over 4 times today. Margaret set down her pen and finally looked at her. The woman had kind eyes. That was the worst part. She wasn't cruel. She was simply practical. Mr. Donovan left without speaking to you. Mr. Ferris asked how many children you had and then went to speak with Mrs. Calloway. Mr. Briggs, I know what happened with Mr. Briggs. Then you understand what I'm telling you. Evelyn understood. She'd understood since the second man walked past her. She'd been standing on this platform for 6 hours. 6 hours in wind that came off the mountains like it had somewhere to be, and not one man had stopped long enough to ask her name. If you've ever stood somewhere and felt yourself becoming invisible, not because the light changed, but because the people around you simply decided you weren't worth seeing, then you already know what this moment felt like. And if you're watching this story and asking yourself what you would have done in her place, stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. You won't want to miss what's coming. If this story reaches you, if it touches something you recognize, hit the like button and drop a comment with the city and country where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The platform at Garrison Falls served as the town's social stage on bride selection days, and everyone in town knew it. The merchants left their shops a little earlier than usual. The women who'd already been chosen in previous years found reasons to walk past. The men who'd come looking stood in loose clusters near the depot building, talking low, casting glances. Evelyn had noticed the pattern by mid-morning. The young women, there were 3 of them, all under 25, drew men the way warmth draws hands. A circle formed around each of them naturally, without effort. The women laughed, they looked at the ground, they said the right modest things, and the men leaned in to catch every word. Evelyn didn't blame them. She remembered being 22. She remembered when the hardest decision she faced in a day was which ribbon to wear to church. That was before Franklin, before the drought years that took everything Franklin built, before she buried him in the corner of a field that wasn't even theirs anymore, before Thomas, who she'd married 2 years later out of something she'd told herself was love and recognized now as exhaustion and need. Thomas, who turned out to be a decent man with a weak chest, gone by his 3rd winter. By the time Evelyn stood on that platform in Garrison Falls, she had been a widow twice, a mother 9 times over, and she had not had a single day in 11 years where she did not wake before dawn, wondering if she had enough to keep every one of those children fed. She was 38 years old. Her hands showed it. Her face showed it. She had stopped being the kind of woman men crossed rooms for, and she had made her peace with that, mostly. What she had not made peace with was the idea of giving up. Mrs. Hartwell, Margaret's voice had softened slightly. There is still Mr. Alcott. He expressed interest in a widow with experience managing a household. He has a farm outside of... I spoke with Mr. Alcott this morning, Evelyn said. A pause. And? He has a farm with 11 acres and a leaking roof, and what he's looking for is someone to cook 3 meals a day and not trouble him too much. She kept her voice even. He told me he didn't want any boys over 12 because they ate too much and got ideas. Margaret absorbed this. I see. Samuel is 15, Evelyn said. Daniel is 13. Yes, I know. So. The snow kept falling. Behind Evelyn, one of the younger children shifted, and she heard the soft sound of boots scraping against the wood planks. She didn't turn around. She'd learned that if she turned around, they would all look at her face to see how worried she was, and then they would either try to be brave for her, or they would start to cry, and neither of those things would help anything right now. What time does the last train leave? She asked. 6 o'clock. Evelyn looked at the sky. The light was already going gray around the edges. Maybe 3 hours left. Then I'll stay until 6, she said. Margaret started to say something, stopped herself, then said it anyway. Evelyn, there are 9 of them. Most men see the number, Evelyn said. I know that. I've been watching them see the number all day. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it down and shifted it to her other hand. But the right man will see the children. Samuel was the one who never let her see him worried. He'd inherited that from Franklin. The same square jaw, the same way of standing with his weight slightly back, like he was always ready to take a step, but hadn't decided yet which direction. At 15, he was already 6 inches taller than Evelyn, and he used his height carefully, always positioning himself slightly between her and whatever conversation seemed like it might go wrong. He moved up beside her after Margaret walked away. There's a man near the fence, he said quietly. He's been watching for a while. A lot of men have been watching. This one's different. He hasn't talked to anyone. Evelyn kept her eyes forward. Different isn't necessarily better, Samuel. No, he agreed, but it's different. She almost smiled. He sounded so much like his father when he said things like that. That same dry, careful logic, the refusal to oversell anything. She had loved that about Franklin. She had also sometimes wanted to throw something at him for it. Keep an eye on your sisters, she said. I always do. She knew he did. That was the thing about Samuel. He didn't need to be asked. He had understood the shape of their family since he was 10 years old, and he had quietly taken on more than any 15-year-old should carry without ever once complaining about it in a way that made Evelyn feel guilty. He complained plenty about other things. About Daniel borrowing his knife without asking. About the way the little ones left their shoes in the middle of the floor. Normal things. The weight he never complained about was the one that mattered. On her other side, Daniel was doing what Daniel always did in public situations, standing slightly apart from the group, arms crossed, looking at something in the middle distance. He was 13 and he wore 13 like armor. Everything about him, the set of his shoulders, the way he held his jaw, announced that he didn't care, that nothing here mattered to him, that he was only present under protest. Evelyn knew better. She had been watching this boy since the day he was born, and she knew that the more fiercely he insisted he didn't care, the more desperately he did. Daniel had been 9 when Thomas died, old enough to understand what it meant, old enough to watch his mother's face and see the way she calculated every purchase at the market, the way she smiled a beat too late when people asked how things were going. He'd never said anything about any of it directly, but he had become, in the years since, a boy who trusted nothing that hadn't already proven itself 3 times over. She couldn't blame him for that either. Grace was tucked against Evelyn's left side, one small hand still gripping the edge of her coat. She was 6 years old, and she hadn't spoken a word in 14 months, not since the night of the fire that took their house in Dunmore and nearly took 3 of the children with it. The doctor in Dunmore had said there was nothing physically wrong with her throat or her tongue. He'd said sometimes children go quiet when the world gets too loud. He'd said it in the careful, gentle way people say things when what they really mean is, I don't know, and I'm not sure anyone does. Grace watched everything. That was what she did now instead of talking. She watched with those large dark eyes that saw more than most grown people bothered to notice, and occasionally she would press her face against Evelyn's arm in a way that meant something, though the specific meaning changed depending on the situation. Right now it meant, I'm cold and I'm tired and I'm scared, but I'm not going to say so. Evelyn pressed her arm gently against Grace's cheek. I know, she answered without words. Me too. It was Rebecca who spotted him first, actually, not Samuel, despite what Samuel said later. Rebecca was 11, and she spotted most things before anyone else because she had her father's eyesight and her mother's tendency to be watching everyone in the room simultaneously. Mama, she said from somewhere behind Evelyn's right shoulder. That man is coming over here. Evelyn heard it. She didn't move. She had learned, the hard way, twice over, that there were 2 kinds of men who approached a woman with a large family. The first kind came with a certain look of calculated generosity, the way a man might approach a table of marked-down goods at a market. Not because they wanted the goods particularly, but because the discount made them feel shrewd. These men were often decent in a surface way and exhausting in a deep way, because they never quite let you forget that they had done you a favor. The second kind came because something had caught their attention, and they hadn't fully worked out yet what it was. She heard boots on the platform planks, deliberate and unhurried. "Mrs. Hartwell?" The voice was low, not particularly gentle, not particularly hard, just a voice that had spent a lot of time outdoors and had stopped worrying about how it sounded. She turned. The man standing 3 feet away from her was not what she'd expected. She hadn't built up an expectation exactly, but if she had, it wouldn't have included someone who looked like this. He was tall, though not dramatically so. His coat was good quality, but he didn't wear it like quality mattered to him. His face was somewhere in its mid-40s, weathered in the honest way of someone who worked outside rather than the theatrical way of someone who wanted you to think they did. There was a scar along his left jaw, faint and old. He wasn't looking at her the way men usually looked at her. The quick calculation, the glance down the line of children, the subtle recalibration. He was simply looking at her, like she was a person he was trying to understand. "I'm Nathaniel Crow," he said. She had heard the name. Everyone on the platform had heard the name. Blackwood Ranch meant something in this part of Wyoming. It meant acreage and cattle, and a man who had built something real from the kind of hard work that didn't leave room for softness. "I know who you are," she said. He nodded, like that was a reasonable thing to say. "Mind if I ask you something?" She waited. "Everyone else here's been introduced by the coordinator," he said. "I've been watching all day. You haven't once asked her to bring someone over to you. Why is that?" It wasn't the question she expected. She considered it honestly. "Because I didn't want to start anything with a man who needed to be brought," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something. "Fair enough," he said. Then, "Tell me about your children. Not how many, not their ages. Tell me about them." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, making sure she was reading this correctly. Then she turned slightly to the line of children behind her. "Samuel," she said, "is 15. He's steady. He's the kind of person other people lean on without realizing they're doing it." She paused. "He's going to be somebody important someday, and he already knows it, but he hasn't let it make him arrogant yet. I'm proud of that." Samuel, to his credit, stood perfectly still and gave nothing away, which was itself a demonstration of exactly what she'd just said about him. "Rebecca is 11, Evelyn continued. "She notices everything. If something's wrong on your land, she'll see it before your most experienced hand does. If someone's lying to you, she'll know it inside of 5 minutes. She glanced at Rebecca, who was watching Nathaniel with an expression of frank, serious assessment. "She'll make a fine businesswoman if someone gives her half a chance." She moved down the line. Martha, 10, who could cook a meal that would make a grown man weep over what his mother never taught him. Joseph, Joey, 8 years old, who had taught himself to read using a Bible and a farmer's almanac, and who asked more questions per hour than most teachers had answers for. Ruth, 7, who had a gift for comfort, who instinctively found whoever in the room was hurting the most and sat quietly beside them. Then Grace. "Grace is 6, Evelyn said, and her voice did something small and involuntary that she immediately controlled. "She doesn't talk right now. She will again. But right now she listens more carefully than anyone I've ever known." Grace, still holding Evelyn's coat, looked up at Nathaniel Crow with those watching eyes. Nathaniel crouched down. Not theatrical about it. Not the exaggerated adult crouch of someone trying to appear friendly to a child. He just went to her level, the way you would with someone you were actually trying to see. "Hello, Grace," he said. Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked up at her mother. Then she looked back at him. She didn't speak, but she let go of Evelyn's coat. It was such a small thing. Nathaniel probably didn't understand what it meant. Evelyn understood. He stood back up. He looked at Evelyn. "Why should I choose you?" he asked. And the way he asked it wasn't a challenge. It was a real question, the kind asked by someone who'd been lied to enough times to want to hear what someone said before they had time to rehearse it. Evelyn had spent 6 hours preparing for every version of this conversation except this one. She said the only thing she could think of that was true. "I'm not going to tell you I'll make your life easier," she said. 9 children don't make anything easier. And I'm not going to ask you to carry us. We carry ourselves." She kept her eyes on his. "What I can tell you is that I know how to work and I know how to love, and I know how to stay when things get hard because things have been hard for a very long time and I'm still here." A breath. "I don't need saving, Mr. Crow. I need a partner. If that's something you understand, then we have something to talk about. If it isn't, then I wish you well." The platform was quiet except for the snow. Nathaniel Crow stood in that quiet for what felt like a very long time, long enough that Daniel, behind her, let out a quiet sound that was almost a scoff, his patience running out before it ever really had a chance to start. Then Nathaniel said, "All right. Just that. All right." It was not romantic. It was not a declaration. It was the kind of thing said by a person who had made a decision and was not in the habit of making a production out of his decisions. Evelyn nodded. "All right," she said back. And the snow kept falling on the platform at Garrison Falls, and the last light of the afternoon went gray, and 9 children stood in a line behind a woman who had not begged, had not performed, had not made herself smaller to fit inside someone else's expectations. She had told the truth and held her ground. She had no idea yet what that would cost her, but the train to Blackwood Ranch left at 6 o'clock, and she was going to be on it. The train to Blackwood Ranch took 4 hours, and Evelyn spent most of them awake. Not because the children were difficult. They were exhausted, most of them asleep before the first hour was out, leaning against each other in the dim car like a row of dominoes that had decided to stay standing out of sheer stubbornness. Joey had fallen asleep mid-sentence, some question about cattle breeds dying on his lips before he could finish it. Ruth had her head on Martha's shoulder. Even Samuel had finally let himself close his eyes, though his arms stayed crossed and his jaw stayed set, the way it did when he was sleeping somewhere he didn't entirely trust. Grace slept pressed against Evelyn's side, one fist curled in her lap. Daniel did not sleep. He sat across from Evelyn with his arms folded and his face turned towards the window, watching the dark landscape pass. There was nothing to see out there, just black shapes of hills against a slightly less black sky. But he watched it with the focus of someone studying something important. Evelyn watched him watch it. She thought about saying something. She didn't. There were moments with Daniel when words made things worse, when the right response was simply to let him be where he was without reaching for him. She had learned that slowly and badly, and through more than one argument that had left them both worn out and nowhere closer to each other. From the other end of the car, she heard Nathaniel shift in his seat. He had not talked much on the platform after the decision was made. He had spoken briefly with Margaret, a few words, some paperwork, the kind of transaction that Evelyn tried not to watch, because something about seeing her future written in a ledger made her stomach tighten. Then he had gathered them up, not with orders, but with the quiet practicality of someone who'd been organizing livestock and hands and equipment his whole life, and had developed an efficiency that wasn't unkind, just competent. He had helped the smaller children up the train steps without being asked. That was the first thing she had filed away. Now he sat reading something, a folded document, dense with print, and occasionally he looked up in the way of a person who isn't really seeing what's in front of them, just giving their eyes somewhere to rest while their mind worked on something else. Evelyn looked out the window. She had no particular feeling about the dark hills. They were just hills. Wyoming was full of them. What she had, instead of feeling, was a list. She had been making lists in her head her whole adult life. It was how she managed the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. The list right now was, find out where the children would sleep. Find out what the kitchen situation was. Talk to Nathaniel. A real talk, not the platform conversation, which had been something else entirely, about what each of them actually expected. Figure out what Daniel was going to do the first time something didn't go his way, and have a plan for it. The list helped. It always helped. It gave her something to do with the fear. Blackwood Ranch appeared out of the darkness, like something that had decided to be there, whether anyone wanted it or not. It was large. Larger than she'd understood from the way people talked about it, and people had talked about it with a reverence that should have been a clue. The main house was 2 stories, solid and square, the kind of construction that didn't concern itself with beauty because it was too busy being permanent. The outbuildings spread out behind it in an orderly cluster. There were lights in the bunkhouse windows. The wagon that had met them at the nearest station stop, driven by a hand named Cobb, who had the manner of a man who'd heard everything and stopped being surprised by any of it about 15 years ago, pulled up to the front of the house and stopped. The children who were awake climbed down. The ones who were almost awake were helped. Daniel got himself down before anyone thought to offer and stood in the yard with his hands in his pockets. Nathaniel was already at the door, which was open. A lamp burned in the hallway. "There's rooms made up on the 2nd floor," he said. "Cobb's wife, her name is Addie. She came by this afternoon and put out linens. It's not what you might be used to. Evelyn almost said something about what she was used to, decided against it. It'll be fine, she said. Thank you. He nodded. He seemed more comfortable outside, she noticed, than he had on the platform. Less like someone performing something, more like someone who was simply where he was. Kitchen's through there, he said, pointing. There's bread and cold meat if anyone's hungry. I'll be up before 5, yo. You don't have to be, not tomorrow. Give yourself a day to get settled. We'll be up, she said. He looked at her. I know you weren't asking, she said. I'm telling you, we'll be up. A pause. Then something at the corner of his mouth that was almost a smile and then wasn't. All right. He showed them upstairs. 3 rooms. He had clearly given some thought to the arrangements because there were actual beds and not just pallets, and the rooms were warm from the stove. He must have had someone light before they arrived. Evelyn put the girls in the largest room, the boys in the second, and she stood in the third, the smallest, with a single window facing east, and sat down on the edge of the bed and put her hands in her lap. She stayed like that for a while. She wasn't sure what she felt. Gratitude? Yes. Anxiety? Definitely. Something underneath both of those that was harder to name, a kind of vertigo. The feeling you get when something you've been bracing against finally stops pushing and you realize you've been using the resistance to hold yourself upright. She got up. She checked on the children. She went back downstairs and ate a slice of bread standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down to eat alone in a stranger's kitchen felt like too much claim to make on her first night. Then she went to sleep and did not dream about anything. Well, the ranch in daylight was a different country. It had a smell, cold air and hay, and the particular animal warmth that spread out from the barn in the mornings. And it had a rhythm, people and animals moving through it, according to patterns that had been laid down over years. The hands knew what to do and when, and mostly did it without needing to be told, which said something about the way the place had been managed. Evelyn watched it from the front porch with a cup of coffee that was too strong, which she didn't mind, and tried to understand the shape of things before she walked into them. Nathaniel came out at 5:30, coat on, gloves in his hand. He stopped when he saw her. "You're up," he said. "I told you." He studied her for a moment, not in an uncomfortable way, more the way he looked at things he was trying to understand without rushing. "Coffee's strong." "I noticed. I've been making it for myself too long." He pulled on one glove. "If you want to make it differently, that's fine. I'll wait until I know what I'm doing with the stove." "Fair?" He pulled on the other. "Addie will come by around 8. She can show you around, the pantry, the root cellar, where things are kept. She's been managing the house on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you want her to keep doing that, she's willing. If you'd rather take it over yourself, she'll understand." "What does she prefer?" He seemed briefly surprised by the question. "I don't know. I never asked." "Maybe ask," Evelyn said. He looked at her again. "I'll ask," he said. Then he went down the steps and across the yard toward the barn. Well, Addie Cobb was a small, capable woman in her 40s who had been holding Blackwood Ranch's household together with 2 half-days a week and sheer competence for 3 years, since Nathaniel had finally admitted he couldn't manage the cooking and cleaning on top of everything else. She had strong opinions about the placement of kitchen tools that she delivered with complete confidence and a lack of sentimentality that Evelyn found immediately comfortable. "The flour's there," she said, pointing, "and that's where it's going to stay because that's where it makes sense. The previous position, over by the window, meant every spring you got weevils." "Over by the window's a bad spot," Evelyn agreed. Addie gave her a short, approving look. "He tried to move the flour back over there last September. Something about light." She said it the way she'd say something about weather. Not contemptuous, just descriptive of a fact she'd noted and moved past. "Are you a cook?" "I'm a practical one." "That's the right kind." She opened the root cellar door and held up the lamp. "Come look at what we're working with." They spent an hour going through the house, and it was the most useful hour Evelyn had had in weeks. Addie didn't cushion things. The wood supply was adequate for now, but would need supplementing before February. The second stove, in the back room, had a flue problem that the ranch hands kept saying they'd fix. The linen situation was fine. The windows in the boys' room leaked cold air along the left sill. "I'll need beeswax," Evelyn said. "Cobb has some in the barn. He uses it on the harnesses." "I'll ask him." Addie looked at her. You're going to be fine, she said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was more like a finding, a conclusion reached after sufficient evidence. The last woman they brought out here, 2 years ago, for the Hartley place down the road, she went back in 3 weeks. I'm not going back anywhere, Evelyn said. No, said Addie. I don't think you are, Bob. The first real difficulty arrived at breakfast. Evelyn had been up since 4:30. She'd made biscuits, a thing her hands knew how to do without her brain's involvement. And there was salt pork from the pantry and a pot of oatmeal that she was fairly confident was better than what anyone in this house had been eating. The children came down in the staggered way they always did, the early risers first, the reluctant ones dragged by hunger. Daniel came down last. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table, the plates, the biscuits, the people. Nathaniel at the head of the table with a cup of coffee, and a look of someone who was accustomed to eating alone and hadn't fully updated his expectations yet. And Daniel's face did the thing it did when he was deciding whether to accept something or find a reason not to. He sat down at the far end, away from Nathaniel. Joey, who had no gift for tension and wouldn't have honored it even if he did, immediately leaned across the table toward Nathaniel. How many cattle do you have? He asked. Nathaniel looked at him. About 800 head, depends on the season. Joey absorbed this. What kind? Mix of Hereford and Longhorn. Which do you like better? Nathaniel considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. Herefords are easier to manage, Longhorns are tougher. Depends what you're asking them to do. Which makes more money? Joey, Evelyn said. It's a fair question, Nathaniel said. He looked at Joey. Herefords bring a better price at market right now. That can change. Joey nodded, storing this. Can I see them after breakfast? You can see the ones in the south pasture. Stay away from the bullpen. What's in the bullpen? Bulls, Nathaniel said. Joey grinned. It was the kind of grin that 8-year-olds produce when they feel like an adult has just told them something useful rather than explaining something to them, and it transformed his whole face. Nathaniel looked at the grin for a moment and then looked at his coffee. Across the table, Daniel ate his biscuit and said nothing. The town of Garrison Falls proper was 6 miles from the ranch, and Evelyn encountered it for the first time on the 4th day, when Nathaniel said he needed to go in for feed supplies and asked if she wanted to come. She said yes, without thinking about whether she should prepare herself for what that meant. She found out on the main street of Garrison Falls. They were at the feed store, Nathaniel talking with the man behind the counter about an order that had come in short, when Evelyn became aware of the 2 women looking at her from outside the window. They weren't trying to hide it. They stood on the boardwalk and they looked with the particular open curiosity of people who have decided that their right to look outweighs your right not to be looked at. She met the gaze of the nearer one. The woman didn't look away. She leaned slightly toward her companion and said something behind her hand. Evelyn turned back to the counter. She had expected this. She had told herself she had expected this, and she had meant it as a preparation, but the gap between expecting something and experiencing it turned out to be wider than she'd accounted for. Outside, one of the younger children, Ruth, had pulled Grace along to look at something in the hardware store window. A woman walking past stopped when she saw them, said something to Ruth, who didn't quite understand what was being implied and smiled politely in response, which seemed to amuse the woman in a way that had nothing kind in it. Evelyn was at the door before she'd decided to move. Ruth, she said. Her voice came out even, which was an achievement. Come here, please. Ruth came. Grace was already moving toward her, with the instinct she had for knowing when the air changed. The woman looked at Evelyn. She was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone who had been important in this town for long enough that she'd stopped noticing what it cost other people. These your children? She asked. They are, Evelyn said. All of them? She made it sound like a peculiarity. Not cruel exactly, but the kind of not cruel that is mostly just cruel with better manners. All 9, Evelyn said. The woman absorbed this. You're the one Nathaniel brought out from the selection. I am. The woman looked at her with an expression that was doing a great deal of work. Well, she said, and that single word contained an entire editorial, and then she moved on. Nathaniel was beside Evelyn before she'd turned around. That's Meredith Albright, he said. Her husband owns the bank. I gathered she was somebody. She's somebody who's used to deciding what's respectable and what isn't. He said it without particular heat, just information. She doesn't approve, Evelyn said. She'll come around or she won't. He picked up the supply box. Either way, it's not something that should matter to you. It doesn't, Evelyn said. And then, because she was not in the habit of lying to herself. Not much. He looked at her. There was something in his expression that wasn't sympathy. Sympathy would have irritated her, but was instead a kind of recognition, like someone seeing a problem they understood from the inside. Come on, he said. I'll buy the children something at the bakery. Ruth looked up at that, and even Grace's hand loosened slightly in Evelyn's. The bakery was small and warm and smelled like cinnamon and burnt sugar, and the woman behind the counter, a wide, cheerful person named Mrs. Fenwick, who had clearly heard that Nathaniel Crow had married a widow with a crowd of children and was fascinated by all of them individually, asked each child their name and remembered it, which Joey considered a personal accomplishment of hers. It was the first half hour in Garrison Falls that felt something like ordinary. They were on the way back to the wagon when Daniel disappeared. Not dramatically. He was simply there and then not there, in the way of a 13-year-old who had decided to exercise some form of independence and done it without announcing the plan. Evelyn scanned the street. Nathaniel scanned it in the other direction. Samuel said, I'll check the alley by the dry goods store. He likes corners. He said it without inflection, like a navigational note. He found Daniel around the side of the hardware store, standing alone, looking at a display of tools in the side window. We're leaving, Samuel said. I know, Daniel said. So come on. Daniel didn't move immediately. He kept looking at the window for another moment, a handsaw, a set of chisels, things a man might use if he had a place to use them. Then he turned and walked back to the wagon without saying anything. On the ride home, Evelyn watched him from the corner of her eye. He had the far-off look again, the one that meant something was working itself through him that he hadn't sorted out yet. She left him alone. She was getting better at leaving him alone. It was still one of the hardest things she did. The complication she hadn't prepared for arrived in the form of a man named Gerald Fitch. Fitch owned the next significant spread of land west of Blackwood, smaller than Crow's holdings, but substantial. And he arrived on the 6th day with a bottle of whiskey and the manner of a man making a social call that wasn't entirely social. Evelyn met him at the door before Nathaniel came up from the barn. Fitch was perhaps 55, silver-haired, with the easy confidence of a man who had been physically imposing in his youth and still wore the memory of it in his posture. He looked at Evelyn with the particular expression of a man recalibrating something. You're the wife, he said. I am, Evelyn said. Gerald Fitch. I own the Painted Rock spread. He offered his hand. She took it. His grip was the testing kind. Nathaniel and I go back a ways. I'll let him know you're here, Evelyn said. She opened the door wider. Come in out of the cold. He came in and looked around the front room with the practiced ease of a man reviewing something he'd seen before and was noting changes. There were changes. Evelyn had been here 6 days, and the room already showed it. A quilt she'd brought folded over the back of the settle, a jar of dried winter grass on the mantel that Grace had arranged with the focused seriousness she brought to all small tasks now, a pair of boots belonging to Joey that she had already asked him 3 times to stop leaving by the front door, and that were there again. Homie, Fitch said, in a tone that wasn't entirely complimentary. It's a home, Evelyn said. He looked at her. She met it. Nathaniel came in through the back hall and found them in that arrangement, Fitch with his whiskey bottle and his assessing eye, Evelyn standing in the middle of the room in a way that didn't quite invite him further. Gerald, Nathaniel said. Nat. They shook hands with the familiarity of 2 men who respected each other without necessarily liking each other. Met your wife. I see that. Nathaniel glanced at Evelyn. There was something brief in his look. A check, she thought. Making sure she was all right, without making a thing of it. She gave him nothing back. She was fine. They went through to the kitchen, because that was where conversations in this house happened, and Addie had left coffee on the stove. Fitch accepted a cup with the generosity of a man doing you a favor. The conversation started with cattle prices and grazing rights, and moved through 3 or 4 other topics with the circling patience of a man working toward what he actually came to say. Evelyn stayed at the counter and did not make herself scarce, because she had learned, the hard way, through 2 marriages, that the conversations women absented themselves from were often the ones that most directly concerned them. Fitch finally got there. "There's talk," he said, "in town. About the arrangement." Nathaniel didn't move. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that says a man in your position could have done better." Fitch said it without apology, which was almost refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending it was anything other than what it was. 9 children, Nat. People are saying, I know what people are saying. Nathaniel's voice hadn't changed in volume, but something in the quality of it had shifted slightly. "I've known Gerald Fitch for 20 years, so I'm going to assume you're here as a friend, and not to repeat gossip in my kitchen." A pause. "Friend," Fitch said. "That's why I'm saying it to your face instead of behind your back." "Then I'll say it to your face. My choices on this ranch are my own business, same as they've always been." He set down his coffee cup. "Was there anything else?" Fitch looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. He had the grace, after a moment, to look slightly uncomfortable. "Just being neighborly," he said. "We appreciate the call," Evelyn said. She said it pleasantly, with the tone of someone closing a door that had been opened without a knock. After Fitch left, Nathaniel stood in the kitchen for a moment with his hands braced against the counter, looking at nothing. Evelyn waited. "He's not a bad man," Nathaniel said. "He just has a limited imagination." "A lot of people do," Evelyn said. "It'll get worse before it gets easier." He turned to look at her directly. "The talk. I want you to know I didn't expect you to deal with that alone." "I've been dealing with things alone for a long time," she said. Not as a reproach, just as a fact. "I know." He picked up his coffee. "But you don't have to, not anymore." He said it with the same plain practicality he brought to everything, like it was a logistical arrangement they'd agreed on, and he was just confirming the terms. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. It was the same word they'd exchanged on the platform, and they both heard it. The second week was harder than the first, in the ways that second weeks usually are. The novelty gone, the reality beginning to settle into its actual shape. Samuel found his footing quickly, attaching himself to a ranch hand named Ord, who had the patience to explain things properly and the good sense not to condescend doing it. Martha and Rebecca both moved into the kitchen orbit with competence and the particular efficiency of girls who had been running a household before they were old enough to reach the top shelves. Joey asked so many questions about the cattle operation that Nathaniel began bringing him along on morning rounds, not out of sentiment but because the boy had sharp eyes and noticed things. And there was something about having an observant second set of eyes that had a practical value regardless of who they belonged to. Ruth and the 3 youngest settled into school routines. There was a schoolhouse 2 miles down the road, which Nathaniel arranged transport for on a rotating basis, and came home every afternoon with the particular combination of exhaustion and information overload that meant something was working. Grace moved through the house quietly, the way she always did. She arranged things. She had a sense for the shape of spaces, for where something wanted to be, that Evelyn had noticed years ago and never entirely understood. She put the jar of dried grass on the mantel. She placed the 3 smooth stones she'd carried in her coat pocket since Dunmore on the windowsill of the girls' room, in a row, largest to smallest, and seemed satisfied by it. Nathaniel noticed. Evelyn saw him notice, saw him pause in the doorway of the front room one afternoon, where Grace was rearranging the arrangement of cups on the sideboard with the focused attention of a craftsman, and she saw him look and look away, and something work through his face that he didn't comment on. Daniel was the friction. He wasn't openly defiant, which almost would have been easier. He was consistently, carefully just outside the circle of activity, just outside the conversation, just far enough away that he could truthfully say he wasn't refusing anything while making it clear that he wasn't accepting it either. He did his work. No one could say he didn't. He hauled wood and fed the horses in the morning and did the things he was asked without complaint. But he did them alone, and when he was done, he came back inside and sat with his arms crossed and his face closed and waited for something that he couldn't have named if you'd asked him. Evelyn knew what he was waiting for. He was waiting for Nathaniel to leave. Not in a hoped-for way, in the braced way, in the way of someone who has been told too many times that something good was going to last, and has learned to begin grieving it before it ends, because the grief is less surprising that way. She tried to talk to him about it once, at the end of the second week, when she found him alone in the barn pretending to check on the tack. "Daniel," she said. "I'm fine," he said. "I know you think that." He picked up a bridle and examined it for no reason. "I am fine." "I'm not asking you to be grateful," she said carefully. "I'm not asking you to like it here, or like him, or pretend anything is different than it is. I'm just asking you not to decide something before you have enough information." He didn't say anything. "You do that," she said. "You make a decision about a person before they've had time to show you who they are, and then you spend a lot of energy defending that decision." She paused. "You get that from me. I want you to know that. It's not a failing I'm proud of." He looked at her then, surprised maybe that she'd said it that way. "I'm not deciding anything," he said. "Okay," she said. She left it there. There was no point pressing. With Daniel, what didn't stick right away occasionally stuck later when he thought you weren't watching. What she hadn't expected was the conversation with Nathaniel that happened 3 weeks in, late on a Wednesday night when the house had been quiet for an hour, and she was still in the kitchen working through an inventory list, and he came down for water and found her there. He sat down across from her at the table, didn't pick up anything to read, just sat. She kept writing for a moment, then stopped. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "I never sleep past midnight," he said. "I haven't for years. I usually just get up." "What do you do?" "Walk, think, go over the accounts." A pause. "Talk to the horses sometimes." "Do they have useful opinions?" The corner of his mouth moved. "Not generally, but they listen." She looked at him. He was in the quiet, late-night version of himself, which was different from the working-day version, slightly less contained, the way people get when the performance part of the day is over and there's no one watching except someone they've begun, maybe, to cautiously trust. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why did you choose me? Really?" She held up a hand to stop whatever he might offer first. Not the honest reason you'd say in daylight, the one underneath that." He was quiet for a moment. She waited. "My wife's name was Clara," he said. "She died 8 years ago. The winter fever. It moved through the county fast and she was gone in 10 days. He looked at the table. "I had this ranch. I had the land and the cattle and the house, and I just kept working. That's what I knew to do. You work, and the work fills the time, and if you fill enough time eventually you forget how long it's been since there was a reason for any of it." She didn't say anything. He wasn't looking for a response. "I went to that selection because Cobb told me I should, and I had run out of reasons not to." He looked up. "And I watched you stand on that platform for 6 hours and get walked past by every man there, and you never did the thing people do when they're being rejected. You didn't get smaller. You didn't perform anything. You just stood there and stayed exactly who you were, and I thought—" He stopped. "What?" Evelyn asked. "I thought, that's a person who knows who she is." He said it simply, without decoration. "I've spent a lot of time around people who don't, men who tell you everything they think you want to hear. I just wanted someone who knew who they were." Evelyn sat with that for a moment. "I don't always know," she said honestly. "Some days I have no idea. I just keep moving so I don't have time to notice." "That's different from not knowing," he said. "That's just surviving." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I suppose it is." The kitchen was quiet. The stove ticked as it cooled. Outside, the wind moved across the roof in long, sighing gusts. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yeah. I'm going to make this house into something worth coming home to." She said it the way she made lists, plainly, without drama, because it was simply true and needed to be said. "I can't promise anything about how we'll feel about each other 6 months from now, or a year from now, but I can promise that." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's enough," he said. She nodded. She picked up her inventory list. He got up, got his water, and went back upstairs. It was, all told, the most honest conversation she'd had with anyone in a very long time. She sat at the kitchen table for another 20 minutes after he left, not writing anything, just letting herself feel the strange, tentative weight of something that might, if neither of them broke it by reaching too fast, turn into something she hadn't let herself want for a very long time. Then she put the list away, turned down the lamp, and went to bed. The snow started on a Thursday, not the fine, dry kind that had been falling the day they arrived at Garrison Falls. This was different. This came in from the northwest with the low, purposeful weight of something that had been building over the mountains for days and had finally decided to come down all at once. By noon, the sky was the color of old pewter, and the wind had picked up enough that Cobb came in from the pasture early and said, without particular alarm but with the seriousness of a man who had seen Wyoming winters do their worst, that they ought to get the horses into the upper barn before dark. Nathaniel had already started moving in that direction. He had a way of reading the land's moods that didn't involve looking at the sky so much as feeling the change in the air, the shift in the way sound carried, the particular tension that settled over the cattle in the south pasture when something large was coming. Evelyn had noticed it over the weeks she'd been here, the way he never seemed surprised by weather, just prepared for it. She spent the afternoon pulling extra wood inside, a task she set the older children to without explanation, because they had all lived through enough hard seasons to understand the logic of stacking more than you thought you needed. Samuel worked beside Ord with the focused quiet of a boy trying to absorb technique without seeming to try. Rebecca organized the younger ones into a relay that moved wood from the pile to the porch to the kitchen stack with a competence that Evelyn watched from the corner of her eye and felt something warm move through her. Joey was inside by 3 o'clock, which was early for him. He'd been out helping Samuel and had come in without being asked, and Evelyn noticed it because it was unusual. Joey's natural state was outdoors and moving, and he came inside only under protest, or when his body told him something his mind was too busy to notice. She found him in the kitchen with his elbows on the table, chin in his hands, looking at nothing. "You all right?" she said. "My head hurts," he said. She put her hand on his forehead. She kept it there. "Go lie down," she said. "I'm not tired." "I didn't say you were tired. Go lie down." He went, which told her more than the words had. Joey argued about everything. When he didn't argue, it meant the thing was real. She told herself it was a cold coming on. Children got colds in the winter. That was what happened. She kept her hands busy and her mind on the wood and the supper and the list of things that needed doing before the storm settled in properly, and she did not let herself go upstairs every 15 minutes to check on him, though she wanted to. By 5 o'clock, the wind had become a serious conversation with the walls of the house. The temperature had dropped hard and fast, the way it did in Wyoming when it meant business, and the darkness came early and total, the kind of dark that has weight. Nathaniel came in from the barn stamping snow off his boots, and stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Evelyn's face. "What's wrong?" he said. "Joey's got a fever," she said. She said it plainly, because that was how she handled things she was afraid of. She named them plainly and looked directly at them so they couldn't grow larger than they actually were in her imagination. But her voice did something small at the edge of the word fever, and she saw him catch it. "How high?" "I don't know. I don't have a thermometer." She said the last part with a flatness that contained some irritation at herself, because she had thought to ask about the thermometer when she first went through the house with Addie, and then had gotten distracted by the flu problem in the back room and had not come back to it. "He's hot, hotter than a regular cold." Nathaniel crossed to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. "There's a thermometer in the top drawer of my desk," he said. "Left side." She went and got it. She came back and went upstairs. Joey was in the boys' room, lying on top of the blankets because he'd said he was too warm, which was its own answer. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the other bed, not doing anything, just being in the room, which was more than Evelyn had expected from him, and she noted it. She took Joey's temperature. The thermometer read 103. She kept her face still. "Mama," Joey said. His voice had gone rough and thin in the way that voices go when the body is too occupied elsewhere to maintain normal operations. "My throat hurts." "I know, sweetheart." She folded the blankets up over him despite his protest. "You're going to be warm for a bit. That's just your body working." "Working on what?" "Whatever came in," she said. "Just lie still." She went back downstairs. Nathaniel was still in the kitchen. She told him the number. She watched his face do the same thing hers had done. The quick internal management, the decision not to show the scale of the concern, and then he was already moving. "There's no doctor in Garrison Falls," she said. "There's a doctor in Harwick." Harwick was 14 miles in the other direction, in a blizzard. "Nathaniel," she said. "I've ridden in worse," he said. He said it the way you say things when you're not sure they're entirely true, but you need them to be. You don't know how bad the storm is yet. I know it's going to be worse by morning. He was already at the hook where his heavy coat hung. A fever that high in a child, if it goes higher overnight. He didn't finish it. She knew the end of the sentence. She had buried a child once. Not one of these 9. Before Samuel, before all of them. A baby, in the first year with Franklin, barely 3 months old. It had been fast and without warning, and she had not spoken about it in 10 years, but there was a knowledge that lived in her body from that time that never entirely went away. A knowledge that children were not guaranteed, that the warm weight of them in your arms was not a permanent thing and could be taken before you understood it was going. I'm going with you, she said. No, someone has to stay with the children. Samuel. He's 15, Nathaniel said. Not harshly, just with the finality of someone who had already run the calculation. He can manage for a few hours, but not overnight in a blizzard. You need to be here. He pulled on his coat. I'll take the fastest horse. Cobb knows the road to Harwick. I'll be back before morning. Nathaniel. Her voice came out with something in it she hadn't planned. He stopped and looked at her. She wasn't sure what she'd been going to say. She settled on, be careful. He looked at her for a moment in that way he had, the direct, unadorned way that didn't perform anything. I will, he said. He went out into the dark and the snow. Whoa. The hours between his leaving and his return were the longest Evelyn could remember, and she had lived through some long hours. She kept the stove burning hot. She made tea that she carried upstairs every hour and sat beside Joey while he drank it, in the slow, effortful way of someone whose body was directing most of its resources elsewhere. He was conscious, which she kept returning to as a fixed point. Conscious and talking, though less than usual, the questions coming more slowly and spacing out as the night wore on. Daniel stayed in the room. She didn't ask him to. He simply didn't leave, and she didn't comment on it. And sometime around 9 o'clock he moved from his own bed to the chair in the corner, sitting with his knees up and his arms around them in the position of a boy who has decided to stand watch, without calling it that. You should sleep, Evelyn said. I'm fine, Daniel said. She didn't push it. There was something about his presence in that room, the sheer fact of him choosing to stay, that she needed as much as he perhaps needed to give it. Grace appeared in the doorway at some point, Evelyn wasn't sure what time, and stood there until Evelyn lifted the blanket on the unoccupied side of Joey's bed, and Grace came in without a word and lay down with her back against Joey's arm, close but not touching in the way that required contact, just near. Joey looked over at her. Hi, Grace, he said, in his ruined voice. Grace looked at him. She reached out and put her small hand over his. It was not a word, but it was something. What? The wind found every weakness in the house that night. It moved through the window gap that Evelyn had packed with beeswax. It moved under the back door. It worked at the shutters, with a persistence that suggested it had nothing better to do. Downstairs, the fires needed feeding every 2 hours. Evelyn did it herself, not wanting to wake Samuel, who had finally fallen asleep in the chair by the front room fire, with his head dropped back and his mouth open, looking more like the 15-year-old he was, and less like the person he had decided to be. She stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m. and listened to the storm and the house and the various sounds of 9 children sleeping and one sleeping fitfully, and she held her own fear in the way she had learned to hold it, close, where she could keep an eye on it, but not so close that it got into her hands and made them useless. Nathaniel had been gone 5 hours. He had said before morning. Morning was still 3 hours away. She made coffee she didn't particularly want and sat at the kitchen table and thought about the list. Not because there was anything on it that needed solving at 2 a.m, but because the act of thinking about it organized something in her that the fear kept trying to disorganize. The thermometer had read 104 at midnight. She had noted it. She had made herself look at the number, and she had calculated the gap between where it was and where it would become critical, and she had decided that the gap was enough, was still enough, and then she had gone back downstairs and held the calculation like a stone in her hand. At 2:30 she heard it, not the wind. Underneath the wind, hooves. She was at the door before she had consciously decided to move. The cold hit her the moment she opened it, the kind of cold that takes your breath before you can offer it willingly, and the snow was still coming in sideways, but she could see the lamp of the barn door, where Cobb must have heard the horse too and come out, and she could see, barely, through the white dark, a shape coming across the yard. Nathaniel was on the horse, and then he was off it, and she could see even in that visibility that the movement was wrong, too careful, the deliberateness of someone working through cold that had settled into the joints and was making everything cost more than it should. She went down the steps. Nathaniel. She got to him and put her hand on his arm. He was covered in snow, his coat stiff with it, his face below the hat brim so cold that the skin had gone a color she didn't like. I've got you. I've got you. Come inside. Doctor's coming, he said. His voice was thickened. Told him about the fever. He's 20 minutes behind me. Took the supply road. It's slower but safer with the buggy. Okay. She kept her hand on his arm. Come inside. The horse. Cobb's got the horse. He came inside. He sat at the kitchen table because that was as far as he got, and she put the coffee in front of him and then took off his outer gloves and looked at his hands, which were red and stiff but not white, which was what mattered. His face was coming back to color. He was shaking slightly, which was actually a good sign, the body's argument for its own warmth. Joey, he said, conscious, talking. She sat down across from him. 104 at midnight. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. He's going to be all right, he said. She wasn't sure if it was an assessment or a declaration. She chose to treat it as a declaration, because that was more useful. Yes, she said. He is. The doctor's name was Aldwin Burke, and he was a small, precise man in his 60s who had been practicing in Harwick for 23 years and had developed in that time the quality of absolute calm in the face of urgent situations that only comes from having been in enough of them, that urgency itself has lost the power to surprise you. He examined Joey with thorough quiet, asked his questions in the direct way of someone who wants information rather than reassurance, and then sat back and told Evelyn what they were dealing with. Throat infection. Serious one, but not the worst I've seen. He packed his bag with the same methodical care he'd unpacked it. The fever needs to come down before morning. Cold cloths on the forehead, change them every 15 minutes. Not ice, just cold water. Keep him drinking. I'll leave medicine that should help break it by dawn. He looked at Evelyn. You've been doing the right things. I didn't do anything except keep him warm and awake. That's the right things, he said. He came downstairs and said something to Nathaniel that Evelyn didn't, and then accepted the offer of coffee with the gratitude of a man who had ridden 14 miles in a blizzard and was not too proud to want it. He stayed an hour, not entirely for medical reasons, Evelyn thought, but also because the storm outside showed no interest in making his return journey easier anytime soon. She went back upstairs. Daniel was still in the chair. Grace was still beside Joey, asleep now, with her hand still resting near his arm. Joey looked up at Evelyn when she came in. His eyes were clearer than they'd been at midnight. Is someone here? He said. A doctor. He came from Harwick. Joey absorbed this. In the blizzard? Yes. A pause. Did Nathaniel bring him? He went and got him, Evelyn said. She wrung out the cloth in the cold water and laid it across his forehead. Yes. Joey was quiet for a moment. His eyes went to the window where the snow was still pressing itself against the glass. That's far, he said. 14 miles, Evelyn said. In the dark, Joey said. In the dark and the storm, Evelyn said. Joey thought about this with the gravity of an 8-year-old doing serious arithmetic. Okay, he said finally, as if something had been filed and concluded. In the corner, Daniel said nothing, but Evelyn felt the quality of his silence change. Joey's fever broke at 5 in the morning, not with drama, but with the quiet resolve of something that had been fought properly and had finally conceded. When Evelyn checked the thermometer at 5:15, it read 101, and by 6:30 it was below 100, and Joey was asleep in the real way, the deep, slow-breathing way of a body that had done hard work and was now collecting what it was owed. Evelyn sat on the edge of his bed for a long time. She was exhausted in a way that went past the physical, the kind of tired that collects in a specific place behind the sternum that isn't quite pain but is heavier than simple weariness. She didn't cry. She sat there and breathed and let the relief move through her at the pace it needed, not rushing it. Downstairs she could hear the sounds of the house coming to life. The stove. Footsteps. The particular thump that meant Samuel was up and moving with purpose. She heard voices, low, the kind of voices people use when they know someone upstairs needs quiet. She went down. Nathaniel was at the kitchen table. He had slept for perhaps 2 hours, and it showed in the gray under his eyes, but his hands were wrapped around a coffee cup, and he looked up when she came in. She didn't say anything. She sat down across from him. He looked at her. She looked at him. It broke, she said. Something in his face, she would have struggled to describe it. Not relief exactly, or not only relief. Something underneath that was older and less articulable. Good, he said. The word came out rougher than he'd intended, and he took a drink of coffee. You could have been killed out there, she said. She said it without accusation, just as the plain fact it was. I know. And you went anyway. He set the cup down. He's 8 years old, Evelyn. She looked at him. I know how old he is, she said quietly. Then you know why I went. She did. She had known it when she watched him go out into the dark, and she had known it during the 5 hours she'd waited, and she knew it now looking at his hands around the coffee cup, and the exhaustion in his face, and the simple, undecorated fact of a man who had ridden 14 miles through a Wyoming blizzard in the middle of the night because a child had a fever and someone needed to go. It was not a grand gesture. That was the thing about it. It had not been performed. He had not announced it or made it mean something beyond what it was. He had simply done it because it needed doing, and he was the one who could. That, she thought, was the thing you couldn't evaluate on a train platform. That was the thing that didn't show up in the first weeks, or even the third. That was the thing that only appeared when the blizzard came, and the child was sick, and there was a decision to be made at 9 o'clock at night with the storm already bad and getting worse. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. She had not done that before. Not in the late-night kitchen conversation, not in any of the careful, tentative exchanges of the past weeks. She had kept a certain distance that was protective and reasonable and had made sense as a posture and had felt, somewhere underneath, like a door she wasn't ready to open. She opened it now, just her hand over his. But they both felt the weight of it. He turned his hand palm up. They sat like that for a while, in the kitchen, in the early morning, with the storm finally quieting outside and the house making its ordinary waking sounds around them. Daniel came downstairs an hour later and found them at the table. Not touching by then, the moment having passed into something that didn't need to be held onto to remain real. And he stopped in the doorway in the way he always stopped in doorways, taking in the room before committing to it. He looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at him. He's better, Evelyn said. Daniel nodded. His jaw worked briefly over something. Then he said to Nathaniel, Cobb said you rode to Harwick last night. I did, Nathaniel said. In the storm. Yes. Daniel was quiet. His arms were crossed, the default position, but there was something different about it this morning. The crossing less like armor and more like habit, the body's resting state while the mind was somewhere more complicated. That was... He stopped. He looked at the floor. He looked back up. That was a stupid thing to do, he said. Nathaniel considered this. Probably, he said. You could have gotten lost out there, frozen. I've been on that road enough times I could ride it without the lamp. He said it without bravado, just factually. Daniel looked at him for another moment. Still, he said. And then he sat down at the table, not at the far end where he always sat, but at the near end, 2 seats away from Nathaniel. He poured himself coffee without asking, which was new, and wrapped his hands around the cup the same way Nathaniel was holding his, which Evelyn did not think was entirely accidental. Nobody said anything about it. The blizzard was done by midday, leaving behind it the particular bright, savage stillness of Wyoming after a major storm. The light coming off the snow so sharp it made your eyes water, the air so clean it almost hurt to breathe. The ranch had to be dug out in stages. Drifts had piled against the outbuilding doors, and the path between the house and the barn had disappeared entirely. Every person who could hold a shovel held one. This included, to Evelyn's quiet surprise, Rebecca, who had commandeered a shovel from the barn before anyone organized her to it and was attacking the drift in front of the chicken coop with the focused aggression of someone who had a personal grievance against the snow. Martha had organized the youngest children into a snow-clearing operation around the porch steps that they treated with the seriousness of an engineering project. Samuel worked alongside Ord and two other hands on the main path. He shoveled the way he did most things, steadily, without showboating, covering ground at a pace he could maintain indefinitely. And Daniel, who had finished his coffee and gone out without comment, was shoveling the space in front of the barn doors. Not because he'd been asked, not because it was his assigned task, just because it was the thing that needed doing and he was there. Nathaniel, working alongside him on the other door, said nothing about this. He simply shoveled. After a while, Daniel said, without looking up, "The post that holds the left door is cracked. I noticed it last week." Nathaniel looked at it. The crack was there, small but real, running along the grain. "Good eye," he said. "I was going to mention it," Daniel said. "I kept forgetting. We'll get it replaced before the next storm." Nathaniel braced his shovel against the ground. "You're good at noticing things." Daniel kept moving. "It's just a crack." "I know, but some people walk past cracks their whole lives and never see them until something falls." Daniel shoveled 3 more loads before he said anything. "My dad, my first dad, he was like that," he said. "He'd spot a fence post going bad from 30 yards. He stopped. He seemed slightly surprised to have said it, the way you are when something comes out before you've decided to let it. "What happened to him?" Nathaniel asked. "The drought," Daniel said. The word was flat and final and contained everything a 13-year-old shouldn't have to contain. "Got sick after. Weak chest." Nathaniel nodded. He didn't offer anything about that. He didn't try to fill the space with something that would fit poorly. "He sounds like someone worth taking after," he said. Daniel looked at him. It was the most direct look he'd given Nathaniel since the platform at Garrison Falls, and it lasted long enough to be something. "Yeah," Daniel said. "He was." They went back to shoveling. The snow came off the shovel blades in bright, clean arcs. The cold air moved between them and around them, and the barn door swung open when they got to it, and light fell into the space where all the horses stood waiting with the patient tolerance of animals who have learned that humans will eventually sort their affairs. It was Grace who changed everything, finally, in the way that the smallest moments sometimes contain the largest shifts. It happened 10 days after the blizzard. Joey was fully recovered and noisier than ever, compensating for the days of enforced quiet with a volume and velocity of questions that had made Ord develop the habit of angling away slightly when he saw Joey coming. The ranch had settled back into its rhythms. The path between the house and the barn was packed hard now, familiar, the shape of a route that was beginning to belong to all of them. Nathaniel had developed the habit of sitting in the front room in the evening after supper, not reading exactly, not quite resting, just occupying the chair that had been empty for 8 years and letting the sounds of the house move around him. It was something Evelyn had noticed without commenting on. The way he was learning to be in a house that had people in it, the adjustment it required, the occasional look on his face of a man still slightly surprised to find himself here. Grace had been watching him for weeks. This was not unusual. Grace watched everyone, everything, with the same unnerving attention. But there was something specific about the way she watched Nathaniel, a quality of evaluation that was different from her general observation of the world, more deliberate, more patient. On this particular evening, Evelyn was in the kitchen and the older children were at the table doing schoolwork, and the front room was quieter than usual. She heard it through the doorway. Not a word. Not right away. What she heard first was footsteps, Grace's small, particular footsteps, crossing the front room floor. Then a pause. Then the sound of the settle shifting as a small body sat down on it. Evelyn did not move. She stood at the kitchen counter with her hands still and her breathing even, and she listened. The front room was quiet for a long time. Then Grace's voice, rough from months of disuse, the texture of something that has been still so long it needs a moment to remember how to move, said one word. "Papa." The kitchen went very still. Evelyn put her hand flat on the counter. From the front room, Nathaniel made a sound. Not a word. It wasn't possible to describe it exactly. It was the kind of sound that a person makes when something reaches the part of them they keep covered, and the covering fails. Then his voice, low and careful and unsteady, in a way she had never heard it. "I'm right here." Evelyn stood at the counter and kept her hand flat against it, and let the tears come without trying to stop them, because some things deserve to be felt without management, without the list, without the careful containing that had gotten her through the last 11 years. Some things were allowed to just be what they were. She stayed in the kitchen. She gave them the room. Grace spoke again the next morning. Not much. 2 words to Martha at the breakfast table, asking for the bread, and Martha had gone so still that she'd knocked over her milk cup reaching for it, and nobody said anything about the milk because nobody was paying attention to the milk. Ruth started crying immediately, which was Ruth's way with things that moved her, honest and unguarded, and Joey said, "Grace, say something else," with the enthusiasm of someone who had just discovered a talent and wanted to see the range of it, which made Samuel say his name in the warning tone he'd developed over years of being the oldest. And Grace looked at Joey with those watchful eyes and said, with the measured consideration of someone choosing carefully from an unfamiliar menu, "No." It was the best no anyone at that table had ever heard. Evelyn kept her hands around her coffee cup and watched her children and did not trust herself to say anything, so she said nothing, and that was its own kind of completeness. Nathaniel came in from the barn during the middle of it and read the room in the 2 seconds it took him to hang up his coat and come to the table. And when he sat down and Grace looked at him across the breakfast things and said, "Morning," in that rusty, unpracticed voice, he said, "Morning, Grace," with the same plainness he said everything, not making a production of it, which was exactly right, which Evelyn suspected he knew was exactly right. After breakfast, Daniel found a reason to be near the barn when Nathaniel was working on the cracked post, and nobody made a thing of that either. This was how Blackwood Ranch moved in the weeks following the blizzard, not in declarations or ceremonies, but in the small, incremental accumulation of ordinary moments that were not ordinary at all, but only looked that way if you weren't paying close attention. February came in cold and clear and stayed that way, which was almost harder than the storm had been because the cold without wind had a patience to it that wore at you differently. The work of the ranch continued with the relentless democracy of ranching. It didn't pause for comfort or sentiment or the internal adjustments of 9 children and 2 adults learning the shape of a shared life. Evelyn had settled into the kitchen with a competence that was hers entirely, not borrowed from the house or the situation. She had learned the stove's temperament in the way you learn a difficult person's, by paying attention without expecting consistency, adjusting without resentment, finding the specific angle of cooperation that worked, and using it every time. Her bread had become a point of order on the ranch. Cobb mentioned it first, in the careful way of a man complimenting something without wanting to seem to be doing so, and Ord said something similar a week later, and after that it simply became a known fact, the way certain things on a ranch become known facts. This is where the fence tends to go first, that is the horse you don't approach from the left, and Evelyn Crow's bread is worth getting up for. She had not yet decided how she felt about being Evelyn Crow. The name sat strangely some mornings and sensibly others. She had been Evelyn Hartwell for 11 years, and Evelyn Forsyth for 2 before that, and Evelyn Marsh before all of it, Marsh being the name she was born with, the name of a father who had been decent and limited in equal measure, and at 38 years old she had accumulated enough names to understand that they were jackets, useful for the weather you were in, not the permanent record of who you were. Still, Crow was new and she was still breaking it in. What she was less ambivalent about was the house itself, which was beginning to feel like hers in the way that places do when you've been in them long enough that your hands know where everything is without your eyes being involved. She had changed things slowly, without announcement. The curtains in the boys' room that let in cold air along the bottom were replaced with heavier ones. The hook arrangement in the front hall, which had been organized according to no system anyone could reconstruct, was reorganized by size so that the children could reach their own things. A second lamp was added to the kitchen because the original position had left the left side of the counter in shadow, which was both impractical and, in Evelyn's view, a problem with an obvious solution that someone had simply not gotten around to solving. Nathaniel noticed each of these changes without commenting on them, which she appreciated. She was not asking permission. She was also not staging a takeover. She was just making a house function better, and he seemed to understand the difference. The harder navigation was social, and it arrived in the form of an invitation. Meredith Albright, the banker's wife, the woman from the boardwalk in Garrison Falls, the one whose single well-crafted had contained an entire critical essay, sent a note in the second week of February inviting Evelyn to a women's gathering at her home the following Thursday. The note was correct in every particular. The handwriting was elegant. The phrasing was warm in the way that perfectly controlled things can be warm without actually generating heat. Evelyn read it twice. She set it on the counter. She read it a third time. What is it? Nathaniel asked. He had a way of appearing in the kitchen at moments when she was thinking, which she had initially found mildly inconvenient and had gradually come to find less so. She handed him the note. He read it. You don't have to go, he said. I know. Meredith Albright does not become a problem unless you let her become one. And even then, she's manageable. What kind of problem does she become? He thought about this honestly, which she had learned was his actual mode rather than a performance of it. She has opinions about how things should be done, who belongs where. She's been the authority on that in this town for a long time, and she's not ungenerous with people she considers respectable. He paused. The question is usually whether you're going to be considered respectable. And how is that determined? By showing up, he said. Or not. Evelyn looked at the note. I'll go, she said. I thought you would. He said it without triumph, just as an observation confirmed. Do you have an opinion about what I should wear? She asked. He looked at her. No, he said, with the caution of a man who had spent enough time around women to know which questions were genuine and which were different kinds of questions. Do you? I have an opinion about what she expects me to wear, Evelyn said, which is not the same thing. She wore her second-best dress, not the best, which would read as trying too hard, and not her everyday dress, which would read as not trying at all. She arrived 10 minutes after the time on the invitation, which was late enough to not seem eager and early enough to not seem indifferent. She had made a small cake with the last of the good vanilla, because arriving with nothing was one kind of statement, and arriving with something good was another kind. The gathering was 7 women, including Meredith, arranged in the well-furnished front room of the Albright house, with the careful informality of a meeting that has been organized to appear spontaneous. Evelyn was introduced around. The names went in the order that names usually go when you're more focused on reading faces than retaining information. The face that mattered was Meredith Albright's. It was a composed face, not unkind in its features, with the particular set of a woman who had managed her world for long enough that management was no longer an effort but a default state. She greeted Evelyn with the warmth of the note, correct, smoothly done, and her eyes did the quick assessment that Evelyn had been expecting. The cake was noticed immediately. Not by Meredith first, by a woman named Hester, who was round and cheerful, and had the genuine warmth of someone who had not spent enough time worrying about hierarchies to develop a talent for them. Hester said, with uncomplicated delight, that it smelled like real vanilla, and asked where Evelyn had gotten it. I brought it from our last stop before Garrison Falls, Evelyn said. I've been saving it. For a special occasion? Hester asked. For meeting everyone, Evelyn said. It was a small thing. But Meredith heard it, and the corner of her expression shifted by a degree or two, and Evelyn filed that away. The conversation moved through the topics it moved through, the winter, the roads, the state of various people's households. Evelyn listened more than she spoke. When she spoke, she was specific rather than general, because specific things were harder to argue with and easier to respect. She mentioned the flu issue in the ranch's back room, and what had fixed it. She mentioned the flower by the window and the weevils, which made 2 women nod with the recognition of people who had learned the same lesson. She did not mention her children more than she had to, because she was not here to defend them, and defending a thing before it's been attacked is its own kind of weakness. By the end of the afternoon, something had shifted in the room. She felt it the way you feel a change in wind direction. Not dramatically, just a slight reorientation, the group's attention adjusting. When she left, Meredith walked her to the door. Your children seem to be settling in at the schoolhouse, Meredith said. Mrs. Pruitt mentioned your daughter Ruth to me. Ruth takes school seriously, Evelyn said. Mrs. Pruitt said she was the one who helped the Delaney boy understand his sums last week. Apparently she has a way of explaining things. She does, Evelyn said. She's patient. Patient people often make good teachers. Meredith looked at her with an expression that was recalibrating something. Will she pursue teaching? If she wants to, I won't stand in the way of what any of them want to do. A pause. That's an unusual approach. It's the only one I know, Evelyn said. She said good night and walked to where Samuel was waiting with the wagon, and she got up onto the seat and Samuel clicked to the horse and they moved off down the road, and Evelyn sat with her hands in her lap and felt the precise, hard-won satisfaction of a battle conducted carefully. How was it? Samuel asked. Manageable, she said. He nodded. He had his father's gift for knowing when a one-word answer was the full answer. March arrived and announced itself with a week of false spring, warm enough that the children started wearing lighter coats against Evelyn's better judgment, cold enough at night that the ground stayed hard, and with it came the first real growth at the ranch that had nothing to do with weather. Samuel had been working beside Ord long enough by now that Ord had started, quietly and without formal announcement, treating him less like a boy to be supervised and more like an extra hand to be consulted. This had happened gradually, in the way that legitimate things happen, earned rather than given, and Evelyn had watched it with the attention of a mother who knows that the most important moments in a child's development are often the ones that don't look important. Nathaniel had noticed too. Ord doesn't say things he doesn't mean, he told Evelyn one evening. He told me last week that Samuel has better instincts with the horses than two of my regular hands. Samuel's always had a way with animals, she said. He's been like that since he was small. It's more than that. He reads situations. He thinks ahead. A pause. I'd like to start bringing him into the planning conversations. For the ranch. If you don't object. She looked at him. Why would I object? Some mothers don't like their sons being given. He stopped, reconsidered. I don't know what I was going to say. Responsibility? She offered. I suppose. Nathaniel, she said. Samuel was managing our family's winter wood supply at 12. He's been the man my children went to when things went wrong for 3 years. The only thing you'd be giving him is something he's already doing without the name for it. Something moved through his expression. I'll talk to him this week. The conversation with Samuel happened on a Wednesday, out by the south fence where Nathaniel was checking the line. Evelyn didn't hear what was said. She wasn't there, but she heard about it later from Samuel himself, who came home that evening with a particular quality of quiet that was different from his usual quiet. The quality of someone carrying something new and learning the weight of it. He sat at the kitchen table while she made supper and didn't pick up anything to read or do, which meant he wanted to talk. He wants to include me in the planning, Samuel said. I know, she said. He told me. You knew before I did. I knew it was coming, not what he said. Samuel was quiet for a moment. He said the ranch is going to need someone who understands it from the ground up when he's older. Not just a hired hand, someone who knows the whole of it. He looked at his hands on the table. He said he didn't know yet what shape that would take, but he wanted me to know he was thinking about it. Evelyn kept her hands on the bread she was working. What did you say? She asked. I said I'd think about it too. That was the right answer. Was it? You don't say yes to something before you know what you're saying yes to, she said. He'd respect that. Samuel nodded slowly. Then, Mama, do you think he means it, that he's thinking about us like that? Long term? She turned to look at him. I was 15 years old, and he was asking her the question that all of them were asking in one form or another, the question that lived underneath every ordinary day at Blackwood Ranch. Is this real, or are we one bad season away from being someone else's problem again? I think, she said carefully, that he is not the kind of man who says things to make people feel better in the moment. He says things because he means them. She paused. That can make him harder to read at first, but it also means you can trust what you hear. Samuel looked at the table. Daniel still doesn't. Daniel's getting there. He's been getting there for 2 months. Some people take longer, she said. You know that better than most. He did know it. He had been patient with Daniel in ways that went unacknowledged because that was how Samuel operated, without requiring acknowledgement. She had always admired that about him, and had occasionally worried that the world would take advantage of it. He talked to Nathaniel today, Samuel said. By the barn. I saw them. What were they talking about? I don't know. I didn't hear. A pause. But Daniel was laughing. A real one. Not the other kind. She turned back to the bread so he wouldn't see her face. Good, she said. That the conversation between Daniel and Nathaniel that Samuel had glimpsed happened because of a horse. There was a young mare in the upper paddock that Nathaniel had bought the previous fall from a man in Cheyenne who had run out of patience with her. She was 3 years old and sound in every physical way, and almost entirely unmanageable in every practical one. Not from meanness, but from a specific kind of nervous intelligence that read every unfamiliar situation as a potential threat and responded to the perceived threat before any actual threat had materialized. Most of the hands had given up on her in short order, and Nathaniel had quietly let them, because he understood something about this horse that was harder to put into practical terms. She was not the kind of horse you could manage into cooperation. She was the kind you had to convince. He had been working with her in increments for months, small daily interactions, no pressure, no agenda, just presence. It was slow and frustrating work, and he had learned over the years to find patience for it. Daniel had been watching for 2 weeks before he said anything. On a Thursday afternoon, he came to lean on the paddock fence, while Nathaniel was in the enclosure with the mare, and he watched without speaking for long enough that the mare had stopped noticing him, which was its own sign of something. "She's scared," Daniel said. Not a question. Nathaniel, who had been standing still in the center of the paddock, said, "Yes." "Of everything?" "Of things she doesn't understand yet." Daniel watched the mare take 2 steps sideways away from nothing visible. "How do you get her to stop?" "You don't, exactly. You wait until she decides you're not the thing she needs to be scared of. Then she has a little more room for everything else." A long pause. "How long does that take?" "Depends on the horse," Nathaniel said. "Depends on what happened to her before." Daniel was quiet. The mare moved to the far end of the paddock, considered them both from there, and then, in the way of horses that are working something out, walked slowly back to a distance of about 15 feet and stood. "Can I try?" Daniel said. Nathaniel looked at him. "Come over the fence slow. Don't make any moves you haven't already started." Daniel came over the fence slow. He stood at the edge of the paddock and waited. The mare looked at him with the measuring attention of an animal, deciding what category of thing this new element belonged in. Daniel didn't move. He kept his hands at his sides and his shoulders low and just waited. The mare tossed her head. She took a step toward him, thought better of it, stepped away. Daniel waited. After about 4 minutes, which is a very long time to stand still when you're 13, the mare took 2 deliberate steps toward him and stopped 6 feet away. She put her nose out slightly. Daniel kept still. She sniffed the air in his direction. Something in her neck relaxed by a fraction. "Now you can lift your hand," Nathaniel said quietly. "Slow. Let her see it coming." Daniel lifted his hand, palm out, slow as rising water. The mare looked at the hand. She looked at Daniel's face. She took 1 more step and touched her nose to his palm. Daniel let out a breath he'd been holding for 4 minutes. Nathaniel said nothing. He didn't need to. Later, when they were walking back to the barn, Daniel said, "What's her name?" "I've been calling her the Cheyenne mare," Nathaniel said. "She doesn't have one yet." Daniel thought about this. "She should have one." "What would you call her?" A pause. Daniel looked back at the paddock, where the mare was standing in the afternoon light with the slightly settled quality of an animal that has had a better hour than expected. "Thistle," Daniel said. "She's prickly, but she's not mean." Nathaniel looked at him. "Thistle," he said. "All right." Daniel nodded. He put his hands in his pockets. Then he said, with the difficulty of someone lifting something heavy at an angle that wasn't quite right, "Thank you for the other night. With Joey." Nathaniel stopped walking. "You don't have to thank me for that," he said. "I know." Daniel kept his eyes somewhere forward. "But I wanted to say it." Nathaniel looked at the side of the boy's face, the jaw that was already starting to take on the shape it would carry into his adult life, the difficulty of what he was doing visible in the set of his mouth. "You're welcome," Nathaniel said. They walked the rest of the way to the barn without talking, and the silence had an entirely different quality from the silence that had existed between them before. Rebecca had her moment with the town in April. It happened at the general store, which was the kind of place where the business of buying things and the business of knowing each other's business occupied roughly equal amounts of time. Evelyn had brought Rebecca along because she was useful and had strong opinions about fabric, and they were at the counter working through a list when a woman Evelyn didn't know well came in with a girl about Rebecca's age and made, in the carrying voice of someone who didn't intend to be overheard, but had not made much effort not to be, a comment to her daughter about the Crow family's charity cases. She used those exact words, charity cases. The store went slightly quiet in the way of a room where most people have heard something but are deciding whether they heard it. Rebecca turned around. She had her mother's directness and her mother's refusal to perform smallness, but where Evelyn had learned to deliver that directness through careful restraint, Rebecca at 11 delivered it clean and straight, like a post driven into frozen ground. "We're not charity cases," Rebecca said. Her voice was the voice of a person stating a fact, not losing her temper. "Our mother came to Wyoming because she was looking for a better life for her family. She found one. That's not charity, that's work." The woman looked at her with the surprised expression of an adult who has been addressed directly by a child and has not yet assembled a response. "And," Rebecca added, with the precision of someone landing a second argument before the first one has been refuted, "the Albright woman called on us last week, so I'd think about who you're talking about before you keep talking." She turned back to the counter. Evelyn kept her hands on her list and her face composed and felt something move through her that was one part pride and one part the terrified love of a mother watching her child walk toward fire and being right about how it goes. The store resumed its business. On the walk home, Evelyn said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Rebecca said. "It might come back to us." "It already was," Rebecca said. "At least this way it came back with something attached." Evelyn looked at her daughter, the square set of her chin, the way she walked like she was headed somewhere specific. She thought about the coordinator at Garrison Falls, 6 hours on a cold platform, the long line of men walking past. "Yes," she said. "I suppose that's true." Well, Ruth's path was quieter and ran deeper, the way rivers do when they found their channel. Mrs. Pruitt at the schoolhouse had noticed Ruth at the beginning and had said to Nathaniel at a church social in March that Evelyn attended with careful neutrality that the girl had a gift. Not a general gift, a specific one, the kind that showed up as patience with confused people, as the ability to find the angle from which a hard thing became clearer without becoming easier, which was the actual skill of teaching and was not as common as it should have been. Ruth had been helping the younger children with their lessons at home for so long that she had stopped thinking of it as helping, and had started thinking of it as just how evenings worked. But at the schoolhouse she had discovered something she hadn't known before, which was that she could do it with children she didn't already love, with children who were not her siblings, with children who started out as strangers and became, through the work of explanation, something more familiar. She told Evelyn about this on a Sunday afternoon while they were doing mending together, the particular conversation that happens when two people's hands are occupied and their eyes are not on each other's faces. "I explained long division to Caleb Fenwick 4 different ways before the 5th one worked," Ruth said. "And when it worked, when I could see that he understood, it was like—" She stopped. "Like what?" Evelyn said. "Like I'd built something," Ruth said. "Not like I'd done him a favor. Like we'd built something together and it was going to stay built." Evelyn set down the shirt she was working on. "Ruth," she said, "that's exactly what teaching is." Ruth looked at her. "Is it?" "The good kind." A pause. "Do you think Mrs. Pruitt would let me help, officially, after school sometimes?" Evelyn thought of what Nathaniel had told her, Meredith Albright mentioning Ruth, Mrs. Pruitt saying her name with a specific kind of attention. "I think you should ask her yourself," she said. "Don't ask me to ask. Don't ask Nathaniel. You ask her directly." "What if she says no?" "Then you know where you stand and you figure out the next step. But she won't say no." Evelyn picked up the shirt again. "I'm fairly certain she's waiting for you to ask," Ruth asked the following Monday. Mrs. Pruitt said yes before Ruth had finished the question, which Ruth came home and reported with the expression of someone who had prepared for a difficult negotiation and arrived to find the door already open. Nathaniel, when he heard about it at supper, said, "You should be paid for that work. I'll talk to the school board." Ruth stared at him. "They won't pay a child." "They might pay a teaching assistant," he said, "which is what you'd be." He looked at his plate. "You shouldn't work for nothing." "I wasn't expecting—" "I know you weren't," he said. "That's not really the point." Ruth looked at Evelyn. Evelyn gave her the small nod that meant, "This is real. Accept it." "Thank you," Ruth said. "Do good work," Nathaniel said. "That's all." "What?" It was in the last week of April that the question Nathaniel had been carrying finally came out. They had developed by then the habit of the late-night kitchen, the two of them in the hours after the house went quiet, not always talking, sometimes just occupying the same space with the comfortable ease of people who have gotten past the point where silence requires filling. It was, Evelyn thought, the most honest part of their day, stripped of the duties and the public-facing versions of themselves they wore through the daylight hours. This particular night he had been quieter than usual. Not the ordinary quiet, but the deeper kind, the kind that means something is being weighed. She waited. She had learned to wait with him. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to know that however you answer it, nothing changes. What we've built here, that's not conditional on your answer." She looked at him across the table. "Then ask it," she said. He looked at his hands. "When you said yes on that platform," he said, "you were standing in the cold with 9 children and a coordinator telling you the chances were gone. You said yes because I asked and because there weren't other options." He paused. "I know that's how it started. I knew that going in, and I went in anyway because I thought what I saw in you was real and that the circumstances didn't cancel it." Another pause, longer. "But I need to know. Now, 4 months in, with the ranch and the children and everything else, if you would still choose this, not because you needed to, because you want to." The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at the face she had been learning over 4 months, the weathered angles, the scar along the jaw, the eyes that were direct to the point of discomfort when they were focused on something that mattered, which was most of the time. The hands around the coffee cup, the way he sat with his weight slightly forward, always slightly forward, like he was ready to stand up and deal with whatever came. She thought about what she would have said 4 months ago if someone had asked her whether she could want a life rather than simply survive one. She thought she would have said she didn't know. She thought she had genuinely not known. She knew now. "Nathaniel," she said, I have not done anything in the last 4 months that I didn't choose." She let that land before she continued. "I chose to get up at 4:30 every morning. I chose to learn the stove and the pantry and the root cellar. I chose to walk into Meredith Albright's front room and put something good on her table." She paused. "I chose to stay up until 2 in the morning when Joey was sick. I chose the late-night kitchen." She looked at him directly. "I've been choosing this every day. I didn't realize until just now that I hadn't told you that." Something happened in his face. The careful, managed quality of it gave way for a moment, just a moment, to something more unguarded than she had seen from him before. He looked briefly like a man who has been braced against something for a very long time and has just been told he can stop. "Okay," he said. It came out unsteady. "Okay," she said back. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the April night was cold still, but the edge had gone out of it. The killing cold of January and February, replaced by something that had room in it, room for the possibility of green things. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. They stayed like that for a while, not talking, the house quiet around them, the children sleeping overhead, the ranch settling into the particular stillness of a place that has been worked hard and earned its rest. It was not a fairy story moment. There was coffee going cold on the table and a list of fence repairs on the counter, and a 7-year-old who'd had a bad dream and would probably be downstairs by 3. It was ordinary in almost every way, except that it was not ordinary at all, and they both knew it. What had started on a frozen platform in Garrison Falls as a last chance, as the collision of 2 people who had run out of other options, had become, through the daily work of 4 months, through blizzards and sick children and hostile neighbors, and a silent girl finding her voice, and a closed boy finding his footing, something that had weight and solidity and would not be easily moved. Nathaniel Crow held her hand across the kitchen table, and Evelyn Crow, held his back, and neither of them said anything else that night that needed saying. May arrived the way it always did in Wyoming. Not gently, not with the soft green arrival of spring and gentler climates, but with a kind of grudging permission, the land releasing its grip on winter 1 degree at a time. The mornings still cold enough to see your breath, but the afternoons carrying something different in them, a warmth with intention behind it. Evelyn noticed it first in the mud, which was everywhere, the inevitable result of frozen ground deciding to become something else. She had spent 11 years managing households through spring mud, and had opinions about it that she did not share with anyone but acted on efficiently. Extra rags by every door, a scraper outside the back entry, a rotating schedule of boot cleaning that she posted on the kitchen wall, and enforced with the pleasant implacability of someone who has decided that this is not a negotiable matter. Nathaniel read the posted schedule on a Tuesday morning with the expression of a man encountering a fact he had not previously considered. Has there always been a boot cleaning schedule? He asked. There has been one for 3 weeks, Evelyn said. You've been following it without knowing it had a name. He looked at her. He looked at the schedule. All right, he said, and poured his coffee. The ranch in spring was a different organism from the ranch in winter. More demanding in some ways, the work expanding with the land's thaw, fence lines to check, the herd to assess after the hard months, decisions about the summer grazing rotation that Nathaniel had begun, in the last weeks, to talk through with Samuel present. Not asking Samuel's opinion exactly, not yet, but letting him hear the thinking, the way a craftsman lets an apprentice stand close enough to see how the work actually goes. Samuel stood in those conversations with his arms at his sides and his face attentive and said almost nothing, which was how he learned best and which Nathaniel had understood without being told. It was in the second week of May that the trouble arrived. His name was Harlan Prue, and he came to the ranch on a Wednesday morning with the confidence of a man who believes his arrival is the most important event in any room he enters. He was perhaps 60, with the build of someone who had been physically powerful for a long time and had arranged his sense of self around that fact. He ran a spread 30 miles south, larger than Fitch's, and considerably less well managed, and he had been, according to Cobb's spare account of local history, a persistent source of difficulty for anyone whose property bordered or intersected with his interests. Evelyn was in the kitchen when she heard the wagon. She looked out the window. Nathaniel was already in the yard. He'd come from the barn. She could tell by the way he'd stopped and turned, not hurried, but with the specific attentiveness of someone who has registered an unexpected arrival and is taking the measure of it before moving toward it. Prue climbed down from the wagon with the air of someone descending a stage. She couldn't hear what was said from the kitchen. She watched the shape of it. Nathaniel still, Prue talking, a second man who had driven the wagon climbing down and standing slightly behind and to the side, in the way of someone who has been brought for a purpose other than conversation. After several minutes, Nathaniel turned toward the house. He came in through the back. Who is that? Evelyn asked. Harlan Prue. He went to the counter and poured water from the pitcher and drank it with the deliberateness of someone taking a moment before they speak. He says he has a claim on the east water rights, the creek that runs through the lower pasture. Evelyn put down the dish she was drying. What kind of claim? He says there's a deed from 1871 that gives his family the right to divert from that creek. He says he's been patient about it long enough and he wants an arrangement. Nathaniel set the cup down. What he means is he wants money, and the water rights claim is the lever. Is there a deed? I don't know. I've never seen one. He looked at her. I've had water rights to that creek since I bought this land in 78. 7 years. Nobody has said a word about it. Do you have your deed? In the desk? Yes. Do you have anything else? Survey records, county filings? He looked at her. There was a pause that contained a question about why she was asking in that particular way. I have everything I filed when I bought the land, he said. There may be more at the county records office. I've never had reason to pull them all. You have reason now, she said. He nodded slowly. Yes. Go back out there, she said. Tell him you'll need time to review the matter. Don't agree to anything and don't argue anything. Just give yourself room. He looked at her for a moment. You sound like you've done this before. My first husband had a boundary dispute with a neighbor in our second year, she said. We didn't know what we had, and we didn't know what we needed to know, and we ended up agreeing to something we didn't have to agree to because we were afraid of what we didn't understand. She met his eyes. Don't make that mistake. He held her gaze for a moment, then went back outside. Through the window, she watched him speak to Prue. She couldn't read Prue's expression at this distance, but she could read his body language, which was the language of a man who expected to win and was mildly inconvenienced by the need to wait. He spoke for another minute, then climbed back up to his wagon. The second man followed. They left. Nathaniel came back in. He'll return Friday, he said. He expects an answer. Then we have 2 days, Evelyn said. I'll go into Garrison Falls tomorrow. For what? The county records office, she said. Everything filed on this land since it was first surveyed. Water rights, easements, deed chains. She was already thinking about it, the shape of what needed to be found. If his claim is real, it'll be in the record. If it isn't, the record will show that too. Nathaniel looked at her with an expression she had come to recognize, the one that appeared when she did something he hadn't expected, and he was deciding how to respond to it. I was going to send Cobb, he said. Cobb's a good man, she said, but I know what I'm looking for. You know land records? I know how to read documents carefully, and I know what questions to ask when something doesn't make sense. That's usually enough. She folded the dish towel. Unless you have a reason you'd rather I didn't go. No, he said. No reason. She went to Garrison Falls the next morning with Samuel driving and Rebecca along for company and the particular focused energy of a woman who has been given a problem with a solution in it. The county records office occupied 2 rooms at the back of the courthouse, managed by a clerk named Tibbs, who had the pale, careful quality of someone who has spent a great deal of time in rooms where the windows were small and the work was precise. He was not unhelpful. He was simply accustomed to people coming in for a single document and leaving, not to someone who sat down at his sorting table with a notepad and asked to see everything filed on a specific parcel since the original territorial survey. He brought what he had. Evelyn went through it. She worked through the afternoon. Rebecca sat in the corner with a book from her coat pocket and occasionally handed her mother the water she'd brought in a jar and said nothing, which was the most useful thing she could have done. The chain of title was clear. Nathaniel had purchased the land from a man named Aldous Spate in 1878, and Spate had purchased it from the Territorial Administration in 1872, and the water rights to the Eastern Creek were attached to the parcel in the original territorial filing, attached cleanly, without condition or reservation. There was no deed from 1871 favoring anyone named Prue. There was, however, something else. In a folder of miscellaneous filings from the 1870s, she found a petition filed by one Emmett Prue, presumably Harlan's father or uncle, in 1873, requesting a water rights easement on the eastern creek of the parcel that would later become Blackwood Ranch. The petition had been reviewed by the Territorial Water Commission and denied in 1874 on the grounds that the creek was already allocated in the original parcel deed. Denied. In writing. With the commissioner's signature. She sat with that document for a long moment. Then she made a careful copy of it in her own hand, the relevant portions, the dates, the language of the denial. And she noted the filing number and the commissioner's name, and she put her notepad in her coat and thanked Tibbs, who had the expression of a man who had just watched something happen that he hadn't expected his afternoon to contain. She came home in the early evening. Nathaniel was in the kitchen. He looked at her face when she came in and understood immediately that she had found something. She put the notepad on the table in front of him. He read it. He read it again. His family filed for these water rights 50 years ago and was denied, he said. In writing, she said, with the specific parcel identified, the creek in question is named in the denial. She sat down across from him. He either doesn't know this, which is possible if his family never told him the full story, or he knows it and is hoping you don't. Which do you think? She considered. The way he came here. The confidence, the man he brought with him. She paused. I think he knows. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. If I show him this on Friday, he'll say it doesn't apply, or he'll say the territorial decision was superseded, or he'll find some other angle, she said. He hasn't built this play expecting to be turned back easily, but it changes what he can do. He can't take you to court on a claim the Territorial Commission already rejected. Any judge who looks at the record will see it. You think he'll back down? I think he'll recalculate, she said. Men like that don't usually back down. They just find another direction. She looked at him. You should talk to a lawyer, before Friday, if possible. There's one in Garrison Falls, Elias Marsh, he paused. Do you know him? I don't know anyone here well enough yet to know a lawyer, she said, and there was a dry quality to it that wasn't quite humor but lived near it. He's careful, Nathaniel said. He doesn't say things until he's sure of them. He looked at the notepad again. This is good work, Evelyn. It's records reading, she said. No, he said. It's knowing what you're looking for and not stopping until you find it. That's not the same thing. He closed the notepad and looked at her directly. Thank you. She nodded. She got up to start supper because supper needed starting regardless of water rights disputes and what the next 2 days held, and she had learned a long time ago that keeping your hands on the ordinary work was the best way to stay level when the larger things were uncertain. The lawyer, Elias Marsh, was, as Nathaniel had said, careful. He was also thorough, and when he reviewed Evelyn's notes and the filing numbers she'd copied, his expression moved through a sequence that ended on something close to satisfaction. The 1874 denial is controlling, he said. If Prue has a deed from 1871 that predates the territorial parcel filing, which is what he'd need for his claim to hold, it would have appeared in the records. It didn't appear because it doesn't exist. He set down the notepad. He's bluffing. Can he make trouble anyway? Nathaniel asked. He can try. He could file a nuisance claim in the county court. It would cost him money and time, and he would lose, but it would cost you money and time too while it was pending. Marsh looked at the denial copy. But if you show him this documentation when he arrives and make clear that you have legal representation and are prepared to go to the county recorder with a formal challenge to any claim he files, most men in his position do the arithmetic and decide the effort isn't worth the return. Most men, Evelyn said. Marsh looked at her. Most. What about the ones who don't do the arithmetic? Then you go to court and you win, he said simply. It's less pleasant, but it's the same outcome. She nodded. That was honest enough. Harlan Prue returned on Friday as promised, with the same second man and the same manner of someone expecting to receive something. Nathaniel met him in the yard. Evelyn watched from the front window without making a particular effort to be hidden about it, because she was not in the habit of pretending to be somewhere she wasn't. She saw Nathaniel hand Prue a document. Marsh had prepared a formal letter the previous afternoon, attaching the filing references and the language of the 1874 denial, brief and precise, and with the particular dry authority that legal language carries when it has the facts behind it. She watched Prue read it. She watched the second man read it over Prue's shoulder. She watched Prue's posture change, not collapse, not concede, but shift, the way a structure shifts when a load-bearing element has been removed and the whole thing has to redistribute. He spoke. Nathaniel listened. Nathaniel said something short. Prue spoke again, longer, and from this distance she could see the quality of it. Not the confident performance of Wednesday, but something with more edge to it, the argument of a man who is recalculating and doesn't like the numbers. Nathaniel said something else. He said it with his hands at his sides and his weight back, and the stillness that she had come to understand was not passivity, but its opposite, the stillness of someone who doesn't need to move because they know exactly where they stand. Prue got back in his wagon. He did not say goodbye. Nathaniel stood in the yard until the wagon was out of sight. Then he came inside. He says he'll look into it further, he said. He won't, Evelyn said. No, Nathaniel agreed. He won't. He looked at her. For a moment the controlled exterior was not quite present, something more unguarded in its place, the look of a man who has been holding something tense for 3 days and has just been able to set it down. You got us out of that. We got us out of it, she said. You built something worth protecting. I just found out what we had to protect it with. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something he had done only a handful of times. He laughed. A real one, short and surprised, the kind that arrives before you've authorized it. That's a generous division of credit, he said. It's an accurate one, she said, and went back to the kitchen. June came in warm, and the ranch moved into the high season of its year. The long days, the work that expanded to fill them, the particular aliveness of land that has been frozen for months and is now doing everything it means to do all at once. The south pasture was green in a way that the winter photographs of Evelyn's mind had not prepared her for. A green so specific to this place that she understood, seeing it for the first time, why someone would build a life here. Why Nathaniel had. Why his wife Clara had stayed. She thought about Clara sometimes, not with the complicated feeling she might have expected, but with the quieter regard of one woman considering another who had loved the same land and the same difficult, worthy man, and had been taken too early from both. She had found a small portrait of Clara in the top drawer of Nathaniel's desk when she was looking for the thermometer in Joey's fever night, a young woman with a composed face and level eyes that looked like someone who had also known how to stand her ground. She had put the portrait back where she found it and had not mentioned it, but she had not forgotten it either. She mentioned it to Nathaniel one evening in June, because she was not a woman who left things unsaid indefinitely when the saying of them was important. I found Clara's portrait, she said, in your desk, the night Joey was sick. He was quiet for a moment. I know it's there. I put it there when I didn't want to take it off the wall. It seemed wrong, but I didn't want it on the wall either, after a while. I understand that, she said. She would have. He stopped, started again. She was someone who would have understood what we're doing here. This, all of it. He said it carefully, meaning it carefully. I don't say that to. I just think she would have respected you. Evelyn looked at her hands. I think I would have respected her, she said. You're different, he said. She was gentler in some ways. She worried more. He paused. You don't worry less. You just carry it differently. She thought about that. I've had more practice, she said. He nodded. He understood that answer. They sat with the evening coming in through the windows and the sounds of the ranch settling around them, and it was not an uncomfortable conversation. It was one of those conversations that leaves something cleaner than it found it, the way certain kinds of honesty do. The wedding was in July, which was Evelyn's choice for the season and Nathaniel's choice for the location, the front yard of Blackwood Ranch, because it was theirs, and because neither of them were people who felt the need to be somewhere other than where they already were for something to mean what it meant. Addie Cobb organized most of it with the same no-nonsense efficiency she brought to everything, and Evelyn let her, because there were battles worth fighting and battles worth delegating, and flower arrangements were solidly in the second category. The children had opinions, which Evelyn solicited because they deserved to have a stake in this, and because ignoring their opinions would have been both wrong and strategically unwise. Joey wanted a horse present at the ceremony. This was declined on practical grounds. Grace wanted the 3 stones from her windowsill arranged near wherever Evelyn stood. This was agreed to immediately. Rebecca wanted a say in Evelyn's dress. This was negotiated down to an advisory role, which Rebecca accepted with the dignity of someone who knows she has lost a round but has her eye on the longer game. Daniel said he didn't have an opinion about any of it, and then on the morning of the ceremony appeared downstairs in a clean shirt that Evelyn had not seen before, his hair combed with water and deliberate effort. And when she looked at him, he looked at the floor and said he'd found the shirt in the box from their last house, which was possible and also beside the point. You look very handsome, she said. It's just a shirt, he said. I know, she said. The morning of the wedding was clear, the kind of Wyoming summer clear that felt like a statement. The light came early and good. Evelyn stood in the girls' room while Martha and Ruth fussed at her hair with the focused seriousness of children who have been waiting for permission to be ceremonial about something, and Grace sat on the bed with her stones in her lap and watched. Are you happy, Mama? Ruth asked. Not to start a conversation, just needing to know. Evelyn looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser. She looked at the face that had stood on that platform in the cold in December and had refused to perform gratitude for being noticed, that had ridden 4 hours on a train toward an uncertain life and spent the night making lists to manage the fear. The face that had stayed up until 2 in the morning with a sick child and held another woman's grief territory carefully, that had sat in Meredith Albright's front room with a vanilla cake and won something without naming it as a contest, that had gone through land records in a small back room until she found what she needed to protect what was hers. Yes, she said. I am. It was true. It was strange to say it and have it be true. Strange the way things are when you've been without something for long enough that its presence feels like a foreign object at first. Not unwelcome, just new, requiring adjustment. She was happy. Not in the uncomplicated way of someone who has never had reason not to be. In the way of someone who has come through enough to know exactly what happiness costs and has decided the cost is worth it and is going to go on making that decision every day. Grace looked up from her stones. Beautiful, she said. Ruth and Martha both startled. Grace's voice was still new enough that it arrived like a gift each time. Evelyn looked at her daughter's face, the watchful eyes, the careful mouth that was learning to trust words again. Thank you, sweetheart, she said. Okay. The ceremony itself was short. Nathaniel had arranged for the justice of the peace from Garrison Falls, a spare man named Whitfield, who had married enough people in enough circumstances to have lost the habit of editorializing about any of it. He stood in the front yard of Blackwood Ranch on a July morning and said the words that needed to be said. And Nathaniel and Evelyn said the words that needed to be said back. When it came to the part where he asked if she would have this man, take him as her husband, and so on, the formal language of legal permanence. Evelyn looked at Nathaniel and said yes with the same plainness she had brought to everything. No decoration, no performance. Just a word that meant what it meant. He looked at her the same way. There was a sound from the assembled family, small but audible, the collective exhale of 9 children who had been holding something and had just been given permission to let it go. Joey started talking almost immediately, which broke the solemnity in exactly the right way, asking Whitfield if he'd ever married anyone with as many children as this. And Whitfield, who was not without humor, said he had not had occasion to, and was making a note of it for the record. The afternoon was, by any standard, good. Addie had arranged food with the help of 2 women from town who had become, in the months since Evelyn's arrival, something approaching genuine rather than merely cordial. Hester among them, unstoppable in her cheerfulness, and a woman named Vera, whose husband worked the county road crew and who had a talent for pie that she was admirably unsentimental about, producing it without ceremony and leaving you to form your own opinions. Meredith Albright came. Evelyn had not been entirely sure she would, and the fact of her arrival, correct, composed, with a small wedding gift wrapped in good paper, landed as something that required noting. Meredith shook Nathaniel's hand and then turned to Evelyn, and for a moment the 2 women looked at each other with the frank regard of 2 people who have been navigating each other at a careful distance for months, and both know it. "You've done well by this place," Meredith said. It came out with less ceremony than Evelyn expected, something closer to a real observation than a social remark. "The place has done well by us," Evelyn said. Meredith looked at her for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The recalibration had been happening since the Thursday gathering, since the vanilla cake, since the things Rebecca had said in the general store that had traveled around Garrison Falls with the efficiency that useful information always travels in small towns. "The girl," Meredith said, "Rebecca. She has a mouth on her." "She does," Evelyn agreed. "My daughter was the same at that age." Something moved briefly in Meredith's face, affection, or the memory of it. "She's a judge's wife in Cheyenne now." Evelyn looked at her. "Then your daughter's mouth turned out to be an asset." Meredith's expression did something it had not done in any of Evelyn's previous encounters with it. It smiled. A real one, small, rueful, genuine. "Yes," she said, "it did." She moved on to speak with Nathaniel, and Evelyn watched her go and thought about the long work of becoming known, the way you had to keep showing up and keep being yourself until the people around you ran out of alternative explanations for you and had to take you at face value. It took longer than it should, it always did, but it could be done, and she had done it. Gerald Fitch was there too, which surprised her less than it once would have. He shook Nathaniel's hand with genuine warmth and looked at Evelyn with the expression of a man who has revised an opinion and is not entirely comfortable with how clearly that revision must show. "I owe you an apology," he said to her directly, which was not what she had expected. "You don't," she said. "I came to Nat's kitchen and said things that weren't my business," he said. "I called it being a friend. It wasn't." She looked at him. "You weren't unkind. You just had a limited view." "I had the view most people had," he said, "which may be worse." "It might be," she said, "but you came today. That counts for something." He nodded, with the relief of a man who has discharged an obligation he was not looking forward to. "You've made something good here, Mrs. Crow." "Yes," she said. "We have." In the weeks that followed the wedding, the ranch continued its summer work without particular ceremony, which was its own kind of statement, the extraordinary having become ordinary, the arrangement that had been provisional and uncertain for months, having settled into something that moved through the days with the confidence of a thing that belongs where it is. Samuel turned 16 in August and spent the morning of his birthday in the south pasture with Nathaniel going over the grazing rotation maps, which was not what most 16-year-olds would choose for a birthday morning, but Samuel was not most 16-year-olds and had never particularly tried to be. He came home at noon with the maps under his arm and the look of someone who has been trusted with something real. He found Evelyn in the kitchen and set the maps on the counter. "He's teaching me the whole system," he said. "The grazing, the water management, the winter feed calculation, all of it." "I know," she said. "It's a lot." "It is." I think he stopped. He was not usually the one who struggled to find words. I think he's planning for something, long term, for me to have a role here, a real one. I think so too, she said. He looked at her. Is that, does that feel all right to you? She looked at her son. 15 years of watching this person grow, through drought and grief and two fathers and 900 difficult mornings, and he was still asking her if things were all right, still making sure. Samuel, she said, it feels better than all right. It feels like something your father would have wanted for you. She paused. Your first father, but I think also this one. He was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his face that was not easy to watch without feeling it yourself. Yeah, he said. I think so too. Daniel's change was the one that people outside the family noticed most, because it was the most visible. The shift from the closed, armored boy of the Garrison Falls platform to someone who occupied the ranch with the ease of someone who has decided that a place is worth belonging to. It happened in increments, not in a moment, though there were moments that marked the increments. Thistle was one of them. By August, the mayor had become, through Daniel's daily presence, and the particular patience he'd discovered he had for nervous things, something close to manageable. Not easy. She was never going to be easy. But she would come to the fence when Daniel stood at it, and she would accept the brush without theatrics, and she had stopped flinching at sudden sounds when he was nearby, as if his presence had become the baseline from which she measured safety. Nathaniel watched this without commenting on it, which was how he did most things he considered important. It was Cobb who said it plainly, in the way Cobb said things, without preamble, to Evelyn, while she was bringing him a bill of lading he'd asked for. That boy's going to be a horseman, not a handler. A horseman. It's different. Evelyn said, I know. Cobb said, does he know? She thought about it. He's starting to. Daniel started to know it the way people start to know the things that are most truly theirs, not because someone told him, but because the work kept confirming it. He started going to the upper barn in the mornings, not because Nathaniel asked him, but because there were horses there, and the horses needed working, and he was the right person for it. And at 13 years old, he had begun to understand that knowing you are the right person for something is not arrogance. It is just accuracy. I was still prickly. He still closed off when he felt crowded. He still had an argument in him waiting for the right provocation, and occasionally he found the provocation and the argument came out, and those evenings were not always pleasant. But they were honest, and honest difficulty is manageable in a way that silence isn't. And Evelyn had learned, or relearned since she had once known it with his father, how to let him have the argument without letting it become the whole of the night. After one such evening in late August, a dispute about something minor that had become briefly loud and had resolved into Daniel sitting at the kitchen table staring at his hands, while the house held the particular quiet of people giving space. Nathaniel sat down across from him. He didn't say anything right away. He just sat. After a while, Daniel said, I'm not sorry for what I said. I know, Nathaniel said. I was right. You were right about most of it. Nathaniel looked at him. The part about the fence section, you were right. I should have replaced it in the spring. I'll do it this week. Daniel looked up. The part about how you said it, Nathaniel continued, was rougher than it needed to be. But you know that. A pause. Yeah, Daniel said. Okay, Nathaniel said. He got up. He put his hand on Daniel's shoulder briefly. Not a lingering thing, just a contact, a recognition. Then he went to bed. Daniel sat at the table for another 20 minutes. Evelyn, who had been in the hallway, went back to her room without saying anything. There were moments that didn't need witness, that needed only to be allowed to settle. Grace was the one who marked the year's end most clearly, the way she marked most things. Not with declaration, but with presence. With the accumulation of small deliberate acts that turned out, assembled, to mean something large. By September, she was talking every day. Not volubly, not with Joey's relentless output, but steadily, reliably, each word chosen and placed like the stones on her windowsill, with intention. She had things to say, and she said them, and she had things she chose not to say, and she didn't say those, and the distinction was hers, and she owned it. She had started drawing. Evelyn found the first one by accident, a piece of paper left on the kitchen table. A drawing of the ranch as seen from the front porch, rendered in pencil with the careful attention of someone who was trying to get something exactly right. Not decorating a scene but recording it. The specific angle of the barn roof, the position of the fence posts, the way the path between the house and the barn curved slightly left before straightening. She picked it up. She stood there with it in her hands for a long moment. She showed it to Nathaniel that evening. He held it carefully. He looked at it the way he looked at things he was taking seriously. She sees things accurately, he said. She always has, Evelyn said. She just has a way to put them down now. He handed it back. She should have paper and better pencils. I'll get them from Garrison Falls. She'd like that, Evelyn said. I know. He paused. I like knowing what she'd like. Evelyn looked at him. So do I, she said. By the time the first cold came back in October, the first tentative reach of winter, not the blizzard, but the announcement of it, the air sharpening, the mornings regaining their edge, Blackwood Ranch had completed a year. 1 year from the frozen platform at Garrison Falls. 1 year from the train ride through the dark, 9 children sleeping in the unfamiliar car. 1 year from the first morning on the porch with the too strong coffee and the attempt to understand the shape of things before walking into them. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window on a Saturday morning in October and looked out at the yard. Samuel was at the south fence with Nathaniel. The two of them bent over something on the post, a repair or a survey, or one of the 1,000 practical things that kept the ranch alive, and that Samuel was learning to do with the quiet competence that had always been his nature, applied now to something worthy of it. Daniel was at the upper paddock, Thistle's nose over the fence rail near his shoulder. Rebecca was coming across the yard from the direction of the chicken coop with the basket, talking to Ruth, who was walking beside her, and even at this distance Evelyn could see that Rebecca was the one talking, and Ruth was the one listening and smiling, which was how it usually went. Joey was somewhere. She'd given up tracking him exactly. He appeared for meals and when something interesting needed investigating, which covered most of the events of a working ranch. Grace was at the kitchen table behind her, drawing. She was drawing the window. Evelyn realized this when she glanced back and saw the angle. Grace was drawing the view that Evelyn was looking at, the yard, the fence, the figures of Samuel and Nathaniel in the distance. Getting it right. Getting it exactly right. Evelyn turned back to the window. She thought about the woman she had been at 37, in the last house before this one, calculating what she could afford for the week, and what she couldn't, and how to make the numbers close enough that the children didn't know they didn't close. She thought about the night she'd decided to put her name on the list for the selection in Garrison Falls, the way that decision had felt like the bottom of something. Not desperation exactly, but the last door in a hall she'd been walking for a long time. The one where you either knock or you turn around and walk back the way you came. She had knocked. There was a version of this story where she would tell you that she had known it would work, that she had trusted something, believed in something, felt the pull of a future she couldn't see yet, but somehow sensed. She had known women who told stories that way, and she had believed them, or tried to, because the alternative, that everything good that had ever happened to any of them, was simply the result of showing up and refusing to leave and doing the ordinary work in front of them every day, felt too plain to be a story worth telling. But it was a story worth telling. It was the only true one she had. She had shown up. She had refused to be made smaller than she was. She had done the work in front of her. She had let herself be seen, not the version of herself that was easiest to accept, but the actual version. The widow, the mother of 9, the woman who had made her share of mistakes and survived her share of losses and was still there at the end of it, still standing, still with something to offer. And a man who had also lost things, who had also done the plain daily work of surviving and had done it alone for too long, had looked at her on that platform and seen not a burden or a charity case or a last resort, but a person. Specific and whole and worth choosing. People would ask her later, in the way people ask when they're trying to understand something they haven't managed themselves, what the secret was. How do you build a family out of nothing? How do you make strangers into kin? How do you start over in a place that doesn't know you and make it somewhere that does? She never had a short answer for them because there wasn't one. But if she had to say something, if she was standing on a platform in the cold and someone asked her to say the thing she knew that they didn't yet, she would say this: you don't need to be without your wounds to be worth wanting. You don't need to be simple or young or unburdened. You need to be honest about who you are and refuse to become less than that to make someone else more comfortable. You need to do the work in front of you with whatever you have, and you need to let the people who have earned it, really earned it, through the blizzards and the sick nights and the long, hard, ordinary days. You need to let them in. The rest is not magic. The rest is just time. She turned from the window. Grace looked up from her drawing. The yard, the fence, the two figures in the distance who were her son and her husband, the woman at the window. Is it right? Grace asked. She held up the paper. Evelyn looked at the drawing, at the careful lines, the exact angles, the figures small in the distance but distinct. You could tell which one was Samuel by the posture, the set of the shoulders. Yes, she said. It's exactly right. Grace looked at it for a moment, then set it down on the table with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has gotten something exactly the way it is, and picked up her pencil again and went back to work. Evelyn went to start the coffee. Outside, Nathaniel looked up from the fence post and turned toward the house for no particular reason, in the way people sometimes turn toward the things that are home to them, and for a moment he and Evelyn were looking at each other through the glass. Her with the coffee pot, him with mud on his coat and a fence post rail in his hands. He raised one hand. She raised hers back. That was all. That was the whole of it, and the whole of it was enough. Blackwood Ranch stood in the October morning light with all the solidity of something that has been built right. Not quickly, not without cost, but right. And the woman who had been rejected on a platform in the cold 11 months ago stood in its kitchen, with her youngest daughter drawing at her table and her other children spread across the land around her and her husband coming home through the gate, and she was not tolerated there. She was wanted. She had always been worth wanting. It had just taken finding someone with the sense to see it, and the courage to say so, and the willingness to mean it every day after, through the mud and the blizzards and the arguments and the long, plain, irreplaceable, ordinary mornings. That is not a small thing. That is everything.